Tonight, we'll listen to 4 timeless folk tales, beginning in the quiet hour before dawn, when the desert still keeps a little of the night's coolness, folded inside its wide, breathing silence, and the sand beyond the last walls of the town lies blue-grey beneath the paling stars. In that hour the roofs are quiet, the courtyards hold the faint fragrance of damp clay and sleeping jasmine, and the wind moves so softly through the palm leaves that it sounds like someone turning the pages of an old and much-loved book. Far beyond the wells and gardens, the caravan road waits in patient curves, marked by stone posts worn smooth by years of moonlight, dust, and hands that once rested there before walking on. Some say the road remembers every footstep that has crossed it. Some say it remembers kindness best of all. At the edge of that old road, in a town of low sandstone houses and shaded lanes called Tazef, lived a girl of 12 named Samira, who slept on a woven mat beside her younger sisters and whose window faced the east, where morning always arrived first across the sand. If this quiet road feels like a place to rest, you can softly subscribe and return for more peaceful journeys whenever evening is ready to become sleep. Samira woke before the first call of the doves because she had learned, from many mornings beside her grandmother, that the desert changed its mood in small stages and that the loveliest one passed quickly if a person kept sleeping through it. For a moment she stayed beneath her light cotton coverlet, listening. Her sisters breathed in the small rounded sighs of deep sleep. Somewhere in the courtyard a clay jar ticked softly as it gave back the coolness it had gathered in the night. From the roof came the faint brush of sand grains moving where the evening wind had left them. She sat up carefully, drew her headscarf over her hair, and felt with her feet for her sandals, which waited where she had set them the night before, toes turned toward the door as her grandmother liked to do, so that the beginning of the day would not have to search for its own direction. The floor held the night's remaining coolness, and she enjoyed it before the heat of noon would gather in the stones. She crossed the room without noise, lifted the latch, and stepped into the courtyard where the stars still hung above the square of open sky, like lanterns set very far apart. Their house was built around that courtyard in the old way, with clay-plastered walls the colour of pale bread, a fig tree leaning over one corner, and reed screens that could be rolled down when the sun grew harsh. In the dimness she could see the low work table where dough would soon be shaped, the brass tray her grandmother used for tea, and the narrow stair that led to the roof. She always felt at that first moment outside that the whole house was taking one slow breath before waking. Her grandmother was already there, of course. Noura sat on a small wooden stool beside the breadboard, her back straight, her white hair hidden beneath a dove-grey scarf, her hands resting quietly on her knees while she waited for the kettle to warm over a tiny charcoal stove. Even in stillness, Noura seemed to be doing something useful. Samira never remembered seeing her grandmother in a hurry, yet everything around her always became ready at the right time. Dough rose, lamps were trimmed, cloth was folded, dates were sorted by softness and shine, herbs were hung, stories were told just when someone most needed them. Noura looked up. Say, and the lines beside her eyes deepened in a smile that seemed to have been waiting for Samira. "You woke with the stars again," she said softly. Samira nodded, and came to sit on the woven mat near her. The charcoal breathed. The kettle gave a first small tremor, and from beyond the wall they heard a camel shake its harness with a muted clink of bells. That sound belonged to the road, and whenever it reached the courtyard before dawn, Samira felt something lift inside her, as if her thoughts themselves wished to be packed in cloth and loaded gently for travel. Noura poured a little water into a shallow dish, and set mint leaves into it to freshen them. The scent rose clean and green. "Today," she said, "the caravan from Harat al-Nim will stop by the east well before noon. Your uncle has sent word. We will prepare bread, yogurt, and date paste for the travellers." Samira had known a caravan was due that week, but hearing the words spoken aloud made the day widen before her like a gate. No morning in their house began with only one task. One thing flowed into another as water flowed from jar to cup to hand. Samira kneaded dough while Noura measured salt between finger and thumb without ever seeming to look. She added warm water slowly, feeling the flour change under her palms from loose softness to smooth weight. The dough yielded and resisted, and the rhythm of it calmed her in the way walking later would calm her again. Nura warmed milk with crushed cardamom for the younger girls, and when the first pale ribbon of dawn lifted along the eastern wall, she sent Samira to the roof to bring down the dried apricots that had spent the night there in a basket covered with gauze. On the roof, the town lay hushed beneath her, a scattering of flat roofs, low domes, stairways and parapets washed in silver-blue light. Beyond the outer gardens, the sand spread vast and level, then rose in long sleeping backs of dunes. The caravan road did not appear as a single line from above. It was more like a habit in the earth, a subtle pale sweep that curved away toward distant settlements, marked here and there by darker stones, thorn-shade shelters, and one leaning watchtower whose top had crumbled many years ago. Samira shaded her eyes. Nothing moved yet except wind loosening along the surface of the dunes. Still, she imagined the caravan already on its way, camels stepping in patient measure, bundles swaying, the smell of wool and leather and spices warming as sunrise touched them. She carried the apricots downstairs and tried not to ask too many questions too soon. After the house awakened fully, its quiet gave way not to noise but to layers of gentle activity. Her mother, Lale, rolled up bedding and folded it into cedar chests. Her sisters, Mariam and little Huda, washed their faces sleepily and sat near the wall with cups of milk while Noura braided Huda's hair with fingers that never tugged. Samira swept yesterday's sand from the threshold. Her father had left before dawn for the date groves near the west gardens, and her older brother had taken the donkey cart to collect reed bundles. So the women's work filled the morning spaces with the familiar sounds Samira loved. Dough pressed and turned, crockery placed carefully together, water poured into jars, the scrape of a palm fibre broom, a low exchange of practical words that seemed to knit the household into one cloth. By the time the sun's rim rose over the desert, the first breads were puffing against the hot inner wall of the clay oven, and the courtyard smelled of flour, smoke, mint and honey. Noura brushed one warm round with clarified butter and tore off a piece for Samira, who burned her fingertips but smiled and ate it anyway, tasting salt and softness and the faint smoke of tamarisk wood. "Not too fast," Noura murmured. "Even a hungry morning likes to be greeted politely." Samira slowed herself, though her thoughts were already halfway down the east road. In Tazef, caravans were not an everyday wonder, because the town stood along an old branch of a trade road that still carried wool, indigo, dates, glass beads, carved cedar boxes, salt blocks, ink, saffron, and letters wrapped in oilcloth. Yet each arrival felt different. A caravan brought not only goods but weather from somewhere else, dust from another valley, accents that bent familiar words into new shapes, news of wells, weddings, births, orchard harvests, changing dunes, and once, when Samira had been smaller, a flock of bright caged birds whose song had made the whole market lane stop and listen. Her uncle Rashid served as keeper of one of the shaded stopping yards outside the east gate, and when caravans were expected he often asked their family to prepare extra food, especially if the travellers included children or older people. As Noura always agreed, "Roads are kinder," she said, "when towns remember their duty to the tired." By mid-morning Samira had stacked breads in cloth-lined baskets, filled small glazed bowls with date paste mixed with sesame and orange blossom water, and tied bunches of mint with thread. The sunlight turned stronger, laying bright squares across the courtyard floor, but the air still held a morning freshness that would vanish by midday. She was carrying a jar of strained yogurt into the shade when a messenger boy from the east yard appeared at the door, dusty and cheerful. He greeted Noura, accepted a cup of water, and said the caravan was larger than expected. Rashid asked whether Samira might bring the second basket herself because his hands were full, counting pack animals and settling travellers into the shade. At once Samira tried to lower her eyes and stand calmly, but inside she felt a small burst of joy as bright as a struck brass dish. Noura, who missed little, pretended not to notice Samira's eagerness too soon. She thanked the boy, asked after Rashid's knees, and sent him off with 2 dates wrapped in cloth. Then she turned to Samira and studied the angle of the sun in the courtyard. "You may go," she said, "but not racing and not with empty thoughts. A girl walking to the road should let her eyes serve her. Notice how the day is turning. Notice who is weary. Notice what does not belong where it stands." This was the kind of instruction Noura often gave, and Samira loved it because it made even an ordinary errand feel like belonging to a larger pattern. She washed her hands, changed into her better indigo tunic, and wrapped a light sand-coloured scarf around her head and shoulders to keep off the glare. Nura tucked a folded cloth over the basket so the bread would stay warm, and set a small flask of sweet mint tea beside the yoghurt jar. Then, after a pause, she reached into the pocket sewn inside her robe and drew out a smooth oval stone no bigger than an apricot. It was pale brown with a faint line running through its centre like a path seen from above. "Keep this in your satchel today," she said. "Your grandfather carried it on long walks. It is only a stone, but sometimes a thing that has been held through many journeys learns how to steady a hand." Samira accepted it with both palms. The surface was warm from Nura's body. She'd seen the stone before on a shelf near the lamp niche, but Nura rarely spoke of it. Samira slipped it into her satchel and felt the shape settle there, as if it had always known that place. The walk from their house to the east gate took only a little time, yet she lengthened it by going through the lane of dyers where strips of wool hung from poles like sleeping banners, then across the potter's square where bowls dried in stacked circles under shade cloth. The town had fully awakened now. Women bargained for onions and cucumbers. A man with a tray of sesame rings called softly to children on their way to lessons. 2 boys guided a reluctant goat past a wall painted long ago with blue stars. Above the lane, woven awnings cast shifting shadows that patterned Samira's sleeves. She passed old Fawzi the sandal mender, who sat cross-legged in his doorway and greeted her with the same phrase he used every market day. "May your steps find the cool side of every stone." She smiled back, adjusting the basket on her hip. Once through the gate, the light widened all at once. She smelled the caravan before she reached it. Warm animals, woven packs, leather, dust, a trace of cumin, and something sweet she could not at once name. Then she heard the layered music of arrival. Camel bells, people greeting one another, ropes tightening, water sloshing into troughs. A baby's brief cry soothed quickly, laughter from men who had finished a long stretch of road and could laugh now that the packs were down. Rashid saw her and lifted a hand from where he stood near the well, counting water skins as 2 caravan boys passed them to a line of waiting travellers. He was broad-shouldered and sun-browned, with a beard gone mostly silver and a voice that could cross a yard without becoming harsh. "Our bread has arrived," he announced, and several people turned gratefully. Samira moved among them carefully, aware of how many kinds of tiredness could gather in one place. There was the simple tiredness of heat, which showed in slack shoulders and slow blinking. The deeper road tiredness that lingered in dust at the corners of mouths and in the way people lowered themselves with care. And another kind, quieter and older, that seemed to belong to people who had walked so many routes that each new stopping place carried memory with it. She set down the basket beneath a shade awning while Rashid introduced her to the caravan leader, an elderly woman named Badia, whose face was narrow and weathered like carved datewood, and whose dark eyes were both sharp and kind. It pleased Samira to see a woman leading such a long line of travellers. Badia thanked her family for the food, accepted the flask of tea with both hands, and said the road west of the broken ridge had become softer than usual this year, as if the dunes were drifting in their sleep. Samira listened carefully. Nearby, boys no older than her brother untied bundles of dyed cloth. A little girl sat with her cheek against a camel's side and looked as if she might fall asleep there. 3 merchants argued amiably over whether to stay until evening or press on after the heat had lowered. Everything in the yard seemed full yet unhurried, a temporary village made by shade, need, and custom. Rashid sent Samira to distribute bowls of yoghurt and date paste among the older travellers. She liked such work because it gave her a reason to move near people without staring. One old man with hennaed fingertips thanked her in an accent she could not place, and showed her a prayer bead carved from olive wood. A woman in a striped shawl asked if the well water was always this sweet, and Samira, proud of Tazif, said it was sweeter after spring rains but kind all year. She moved from shade to shade, carrying bread rounds wrapped in cloth, and each time she crouched to offer food she glimpsed some small sign of another life. A box of blue stones, a tiny brass bird tied to a pack frame, embroidered cuffs, a child's reed flute, a stitched leather notebook darkened by years of handling. Seemed to her that every traveller brought a whole world inside one bundle. At the far side of the yard, beyond the last tethering post, she saw a narrow cart half covered with a wool blanket. Beside it sat an old man in a sand-coloured robe, his head bowed, his hands folded over a staff cut from pale wood. He was not eating, though a bowl and bread had already been set near him. Something in the stillness around him made Samira approach more slowly. When she came near, she saw that his eyes were open but clouded white. Blind, then. Yet he had turned his face slightly toward the breeze as if reading what it carried. "Peace on your rest," Samira said softly. The old man smiled. "And peace on your footsteps," he replied, his voice thin but clear. She asked whether he would like yogurt, and he said yes. If she did not mind placing the bowl directly into his left hand because the right had stiffened on the road. When she did so, his fingertips brushed hers for only an instant. They were cool despite the day. Before she could rise, he said, "You carry an old roadstone." Samira froze with surprise so sharp it almost felt impolite. Her satchel hung at her side, closed. No part of the stone showed. She looked around, half expecting Rashid to be playing some small trick, but no one nearby seemed to have noticed anything. "My grandmother gave it to me this morning," she said. The old man nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. "There are stones that remember a pocket," he murmured. "There are roads that remember a step. Sometimes they call to one another." His blind eyes lifted toward the east beyond the yard. "If you walk tomorrow to the 7th marker, place the stone on the ground before sunrise and listen before you look." Samira's first feeling was not fear, but a kind of widened wonder. The words did not sound like a warning. They sounded like a custom from a place she had somehow forgotten. "What would I hear?" she asked. The old man's mouth curved. "Whatever the road has kept." Then Rashid called her name from the well, and by the time she glanced back again after answering, another traveller had drawn a blanket more fully over the cart. She finished her tasks in a daze of attention, hearing every camel bell and human voice, as if a second meaning might be hidden behind each one. The heat deepened through noon. The yard grew quieter as travellers ate, drank, and lay down beneath awnings or beside packs to sleep through the strongest light. And as Samira helped wash bowls, then sat with Rashid in the strip of wool shade nearest the road, while he checked the list of departures. He tore bread into small pieces and dipped them into olive oil with crushed herbs, eating slowly as always. Samira wanted to ask about the blind old man at once, yet she had learned from Nura that questions ripened better if left alone for a little while. So she began by asking who he was. Rashid considered. "They call him Uthman the Listener," he said. "He has travelled that branch road longer than I have kept this yard, and perhaps longer than your mother has been alive. Some say he once guided caravans by sound alone when moonlight failed. Others say he remembers every well from here to the northern salt flats. Perhaps both are true. Badia says she found him waiting at the marker of palms 3 days ago, as if he had known her caravan would come." Rashid took another bite and squinted into the glare. "People like him are part of the road now. No one is certain when they began, and no one is surprised when they appear." Samira listened, thrilled by the matter-of-factness with which he spoke. In Tazef, old stories and practical life were not enemies. A well could be measured and still be blessed. A road could be swept and still be said to remember. "Has he ever spoken of stones?" she asked. Rashid wiped his fingers. "Many roads have stones. Many stories do too." "Why?" She hesitated, then showed him Nura's stone. Rashid's expression changed only slightly, but enough for Samira to notice. "Ah," he said. "Your grandfather carried that on his watch walks. I have not seen it with you before." He weighed it in his palm, then gave it back. "If Uthman noticed it, I'm not surprised. Men who lose one kind of sight often learn strange courtesy from the world. They are told more than others if they listen well." When Samira returned home in the late afternoon, the sun had begun its long slant westward, and the shadows of the town walls stretched like cool water across the lane. The house smelled of lentils simmered with onions, coriander, and a little dried lime. Her sisters had spent part of the day under the fig tree stringing date pits for counting games, and Huda ran to meet her at the door with dusty hands and urgent questions about camels, children, and whether any traveller had worn silver shoes. Samira laughed and said no to the shoes, though one woman had sandals worked with blue thread. In the courtyard, Nura was sorting dried herbs into jars, and her mother was rolling grape leaves around rice for the evening meal. Samira knelt to help at once, because in their house, the best way to bring news was while the hands remained useful. She described the size of the caravan, the sweetness of the well-greetings, the shade awnings full of sleeping travellers, and finally the blind old man who had known about the stone in her satchel. Neither Nura nor Layla interrupted. That, more than anything, told Samira the story mattered. When she repeated his words about the 7th marker and listening before looking, Nura's fingers paused over the herbs. She did not seem alarmed, only thoughtful in a way that made her face return for a moment to some earlier decade. Your grandfather once told me that the old marker line east of Tazef was set by people who believed roads should be spoken to politely, she said. He said each marker was placed where a traveller most needed remembering. At a turn, near a vanished well, before a stretch of bad glare, beside a patch of winter shelter. The 7th is not far if one starts before dawn. I walked there once when I was younger than your mother. Samira leaned closer. What happened? Nura resumed stripping thyme leaves into a bowl. I heard only wind, she said, but it was a wind that seemed to know my name kindly. At my age then, that was enough magic for one morning. The evening gathered with the gracious steadiness Samira loved best. Her father returned smelling of dates, palm sap, and sun-warmed rope, and listened to the day's account while washing at the basin by the wall. They ate in the courtyard from shared bowls, lentils thickened until almost creamy, rice wrapped in leaves, cucumbers cooled in water, olives, yoghurt with mint, and the last of the morning's bread brushed again with butter to soften it. Above them the sky darkened from pale brass to violet. The first bats flickered high over the fig tree. Then the call to prayer moved across the town from one minaret to another, each voice taking up what the first had offered and carrying it onward into the widening blue. Afterward, Nura lit the brass lamp in the wall niche, and the household settled into the quieter portion of night when mending, story and planning belonged together. Samira sat near her grandmother with the stone in her lap. It had become an object she could not stop touching, though nothing about it seemed remarkable to the eye. Smooth, warm, faintly striped, perhaps a river stone from some older landscape carried here by someone's hand. Her father looked at it once and smiled. That little companion again, he said. It saw many moonrises with your grandfather. He used to tap it twice on the watchpost before beginning his rounds. Said it helped him leave his household thoughts at the doorway and walk with road thoughts instead. Samira liked the idea that there were different thoughts for different kinds of walking. She asked whether she might go to the 7th marker before sunrise with Nura. There was a silence of consideration, not refusal. At last her mother said the morning would be cool and the road near enough if they returned before the heat sharpened. Nura nodded. We will go, she said, but we will go as people of sense, with water, bread and a cloth for shade, not as children chasing marvels with empty stomachs. That night Samira slept lightly, as if some portion of her had already risen and gone out ahead to wait on the road. She dreamed not of dramatic wonders, but of small, precise things. The pattern made by camel bells against silence, a line of footsteps filling slowly with silver water, a stone post that hummed under her hand like a jar when tapped. Before the sky had changed colour, Nura's hand touched her shoulder. They dressed by lamplight. Samira wrapped bread and dates, filled a water skin, and slipped the stone into a satchel. The town was quieter than it had been the previous morning because even the earliest bakers had not yet lit their ovens. Their sandals made a soft brushing sound over the lane dust. At the east gate the watchman, who knew Nura well, wished them a peaceful walk and asked no questions. Beyond the wall the desert opened in layered dimness. The stars had thinned but not vanished. The road showed as a pale band between darker gravel flats, and the line of markers stood at intervals like waiting figures. They were not identical. Some were tall and narrow, others broken, others half-leaning with age. Nura told Samira that generations of travellers had repaired them when they could, but storms and time were patient enemies. A marker does not have to stand proudly to be useful, she said. Many old things do their best work after they have become modest. They walked side by side without hurrying. At first the air was cool enough that Samira pulled her scarf closer around her throat. She could smell dry sage underfoot where their sandals brushed it, and now and then the wind carried the mineral scent of stone cooling after night. They passed the first marker, then the second. each one standing in its own little drift of silence. Samira counted softly under her breath. By the 5th, the eastern horizon glowed faintly pearl. By the 6th, she felt the world holding itself very still. The 7th marker stood near a low rise of weathered rock that cast a shallow stripe of shadow even in dawn's uncertain light. It was shorter than the others, broad at the base and tapered at the top, with old carved lines almost worn away. Someone had once set a flat stone beside it, perhaps as a place to rest a bundle. Nura stopped there without needing to be told. "This is it," she said. Her voice had become quiet in a different way, not hushed by secrecy, but by respect. Samira swallowed and took the oval stone from her satchel. It seemed warmer than the air. Remembering Uthman's words, she knelt and placed it on the ground before the marker. Then she waited, her hands resting on her thighs, listening before looking. At first she heard only what anyone would hear, the whisper of a breeze moving along the gravel, a distant bird just beginning its morning call, the soft settling sound of sand shifting where a dune's edge loosened. Then another layer came forward, so faint she thought she might have imagined it. It sounded like footsteps heard from very far away, not one pair but many, softened by time, patient and evenly spaced. Not marching, not hurrying, walking. She felt the sound more than she heard it, as if it rose through the soles of her feet and the bones of her knees. The desert around her did not change in any visible way, yet the silence became full rather than empty, occupied by a memory that had never truly gone. Samira looked up sharply. The marker's carved lines, nearly invisible moments earlier, seemed clearer now. They curved and crossed in a pattern like a road map reduced to symbols. A well, perhaps, a shelter, a bend. Light strengthened along the eastern edge of the world. Beside her, Nura drew in one slow breath but did not speak. Samira kept listening. Beneath the many-footed hush, another sound separated itself little by little, almost like the brushing of a hand over woven cloth. Then she understood it as voices, not clear enough for words, but carrying the mood of words exchanged kindly on a road. Greetings, perhaps, or thanks, or the ordinary practical phrases people use when they mean no harm. She did not feel fear. She felt a tenderness so sudden it made her throat tighten. It was as if the marker held not ghosts, which would have been cold and strange, but the memory of courtesy itself. Travellers had paused here, shared water here, asked after one another's animals here, shifted burdens, welcomed dawn, endured heat, and gone on. The road had taken all of that into itself, and for one brief moment was willing to let her notice. The light increased. The sounds faded back into wind. When she finally lifted the stone from the ground, it was cool, though her palm had been warm around it only moments before. Nura knelt with more difficulty but no less steadiness, and laid her hand on the carved marker. "Your grandfather heard something at this stone too," she said. "He told me only once. He said old roads do not ask to be admired, they ask to be remembered properly." Samira looked from the marker to the wide pale road stretching onward beyond the rise. The line of it seemed suddenly fuller, as if every journey that had passed there still gave shape to the next. "What should I do with the stone now?" she asked. Nura smiled. "Carry it until it teaches you something you can name." They did not turn home at once. Since the morning remained cool, Nura suggested they walk farther to the shelter of Half Moon Rock and eat breakfast there. Samira agreed eagerly, though the greatest wonder of the day had perhaps already happened. Yet after the listening at the marker, even ordinary things felt burnished. The road shone more clearly. The pebbles underfoot looked chosen rather than scattered. Small tracks of lizards crossing the dust appeared like brief handwriting. Nura walked with her usual measured pace, leaning a little on the ashwood stick she carried. She pointed out a desert shrub whose roots could scent out water far deeper than a person would guess, a line of old hoof prints left by donkeys the afternoon before, a patch of wind-rippled sand that showed how the air had shifted in the night. Samira listened to all of it with renewed hunger, because the morning had taught her that attention itself might open hidden doors. At Half Moon Rock they sat in a curved pocket of shade and ate bread with crushed dates and sesame while the sun slowly lifted. A pair of cream-coloured birds hopped near them, bold with morning curiosity. Nura poured a little water over her hands and rubbed them dry with a cloth. Then, looking out over the road, she began to tell Samira about her grandfather Karim, when he had been a night watchman in the years before the Western Orchard Wall was built. He had walked the road's edge between town and the first 3 markers, carrying a lamp and the oval stone in his pocket. Not because the stone had powers he could prove, Nura said, but because it reminded him that roads belonged to people as much as towns did, and that the spaces between homes required caretaking too. He believed neglect arrives quietly, she said. A loose step, a fallen marker, a forgotten custom, a well not cleaned, a traveller not greeted. Then one day everyone behaves as if the road was always lonely. He would not allow that. Samira tucked that sentence inside herself where she kept things worth returning to. Summer deepened. The long days grew white with heat, and the market awnings hung lower to preserve pockets of shade. Work shifted earlier and later, leaving midday to quiet tasks indoors. Samira helped dry apricots on the roof, sort lentils for tiny stones, fan the oven, and wash wool in the courtyard basin when enough water could be spared. Yet her thoughts returned again and again to the old markers east of town. She began asking careful questions of anyone who might know something. The sandal mender remembered that the 11th marker once stood beside a traveller's fig tree long since dead. A seller of lamp oil claimed the 15th marked the last place where a person could see both the eastern dunes and the minaret of Tazef on the same clear day. Rashid said the 18th used to have a shelter wall, but half of it collapsed in his youth, and no one rebuilt it because fewer caravans went that far on foot now that the southern route had improved. Each answer drew the road farther through Samira's mind, extending it not only across the desert, but through time. She began sketching the markers on scraps of old account paper, first in order, then with notes beside them, leaning broad, carved, cracked tamarisk near, echo basin, black stones, Fahaim, possible old well. Her mother laughed to see such seriousness over weathered posts, yet she saved the scraps from the kitchen fire and flattened them for her. Nura said nothing for several days, which usually meant she was allowing a thought to gather shape. Finally one evening, as they shelled pistachios together, she remarked, "Road-keeping takes many forms. Some sweep, some guide, some remember, some make maps so that forgetting has less room to settle." Samira looked up quickly. Nura's face gave away little, but her eyes were kind. At the Festival of Wells that evening the town glowed. Lamps lit niches, gate arches, and stair corners. The sky turned indigo, and then black velvet strewn with stars so abundant that the spaces between them seemed smaller than usual. Samira carried a tray of mint water cups beside Mariam and 2 cousins, walking toward the east yard where a modest line of traders and family travellers had settled for the night. Music floated from somewhere behind them, not loud, only a flute and frame drum moving in easy companionship. At the yard, Rashid accepted the trays and arranged the children in pairs so each visitor would be greeted. Samira moved among the awnings, offering cups with both hands, the way Nura had taught her, and receiving blessings in return. Near the last shelter she noticed Uthman the listener again, seated exactly as before beside a blanket-covered cart, as if he had risen from the road's memory for one evening and returned unchanged. She offered him mint water. He accepted and drank a little, then tilted his head. "The stoneware's blue now," he said. Samira nearly laughed at the gentle accuracy of it. "A friend gave me the ribbon," she replied. "Then the stone has learned a new road," Uthman said. The festival lamps flickered against the curve of his cheek. "Tell me, child of Tazef, what did the 7th marker keep?" She hesitated, wanting the words to be right. "Footsteps," she said finally, "and the feeling of people being careful with one another." Uthman smiled. "Good. If you can hear that, perhaps you are ready to hear what is missing." The pleasure of the evening paused inside her. "Missing?" she repeated softly. He lifted one shoulder. "Not lost beyond return, only neglected. Between the 12th and 13th markers, there once stood a rest niche for water jars and lamps. Storms buried it by degrees. Few remember it now, yet roads miss what served them faithfully." He returned the empty cup. Ask your grandmother about the lamp niche of Sereh." Before Samira could frame another question, a family approached requesting drinks, and when she looked back moments later, Uthman had turned inward again, hands folded, part of the evening and apart from it. She waited until the trays were emptied, and the children dismissed before hurrying home through lamplit lanes. The house still hummed with festival wakefulness. Her father and two neighbours sat by the doorway sharing figs and speaking of water levels. The younger girls had fallen asleep against their mother's lap on the roof. Nura alone remained in the courtyard, trimming the lamp wick lower now that the evening had deepened. When Samira repeated Uthman's words, a curious expression crossed her face. Surprise first, then recognition, then something like decision. She motioned for Samira to sit. The lamp niche of Saray, she said slowly, was a roadside shelter no larger than an oven alcove. Travellers once left spare lamp oil there for anyone delayed past sunset, and a water jar was kept in the shade beside it. Your grandfather showed it to me when we were newly married, though by then the jar stand was broken. The niche itself was small, built into a low wall of stone. I had forgotten it. She did not sound ashamed, only sobered. When the southern route improved and fewer people walked the old stretch beyond the 12th marker, such places slipped from daily thought. That is how neglect arrives, just as Kareem used to say. Samira felt the old road expanding again inside her, this time with a hollow in it where something useful had been. Could we find it? She asked. Nura looked toward the dark doorway leading to the lane, as if seeing not the town beyond but the marker line eastward. Yes, she said, if the dunes have not swallowed it entirely, and if we do find it, perhaps remembering should not end there. The days that followed moved with a new purpose beneath ordinary chores. Nura did not announce plans grandly. That was not her way. Instead she spoke to Rashid, then to Samira's father, then to old Fawzi the sandal mender, whose memory for landmarks was nearly as respected as his skill with leather. She asked who might know the 12th and 13th markers well enough to guide a search. She borrowed an old route sketch from the keeper of the Date Measure House. She sent Mariam with a bowl of fresh cheese to a widow whose brother had once walked messenger routes east of town. Each conversation added a thread. By week's end they knew this much. The lamp niche of Saray had stood on the north side of the road, half sheltered by a shoulder of dark stone. A dwarf tamarisk once grew beside it, and the jar stand, though broken, had been made of 3 stacked stones easy to distinguish from the surrounding gravel. Samira listened to every report as if collecting beads for a necklace she could almost see completed. The search would begin 2 mornings later, before the heat, with a small group carrying water, bread, a spade, and cloth screens in case the wind rose. Samira had permission to join because Nura insisted that a person who hears a road's question should be allowed to help answer it. The search morning dawned clear and cool. Their party was not large. Nura, Samira, Rashid, Fawzi, he was surprisingly light on his feet for a man who spent so much time cross-legged, and a mason named Haroun who had kind hands and an eye for old stonework. They set out before sunrise with 2 donkeys carrying water skins and rolled reed mats. Samira wore her plainest tunic because sand and rock would not respect good cloth. The blue-wrapped stone rested in her satchel, and though no one had said it must come, she would not have left it behind. They passed the familiar first markers, then the 7th where Samira looked only briefly, as if greeting a friend while hurrying to a necessary errand. Beyond the 9th the road altered. Fewer recent tracks crossed it. Wind had drawn finer lines over the surface. The markers stood farther apart than she expected, and the silence between them grew broader, though not unfriendly. At the 11th marker, Fawzi pointed with his staff toward a shallow depression where the old fig tree had once been. Nothing remained but a shift in soil colour and a slightly different scatter of stones. "See," he said, "a place keeps the shape of what mattered to it." Samira stored the remark with all the others. Soon after, the 12th marker appeared, cracked along one side, leaning a little east, banded with lichen-like pale staining near its base. The group slowed. Rashid shaded his eyes. Harun scanned the north side of the road where dark stones rose in a low shoulder, half buried at their lower edges. If there was a niche wall, perhaps there, he said. They spread out carefully, not trampling more ground than necessary. The morning stayed gentle for a time. A thin breeze moved from east to west, or brushing the hems of robes and carrying with it the mineral scent of hidden stone warmed slowly by dawn. Samira searched near the road's edge first, looking for shapes too deliberate to be natural. Several times excitement misled her. A flat rock that turned out to be only a flat rock. a cluster of pebbles arranged by wind, a shallow hollow with no worked stones near it. Yet the search itself soothed her. It felt good to move with attention shared among several people, each bringing a different kind of knowledge. Fawzi looked for the lie of paths around obstacles, Haroun for edges and joints, Rashid for practical signs of old stopping habits, Noura for what she called the manners of a place. A rest niche is not only built, she said, it invites. Look for a patch that still feels as though it wishes to receive someone. Samira loved her for saying such things plainly. She climbed the low shoulder of dark stone and crouched there, letting her eyes soften rather than strain. Below her the road curved gently. The markers to either side stood patient and sun-touched. A few paces beyond the shoulder, half veiled by drifted sand, she noticed 3 stones that seemed too square in relation to one another. Her pulse quickened. She brushed away sand with both hands. The top stone shifted, revealing a second beneath it with one face unnaturally smooth. "Here," she called, trying not to make the word too large. The others came. Haroun knelt first, then Rashid beside him. They worked the sand back carefully with wooden scoops in their palms. Little by little the shape emerged. Not a complete wall, but the corner of one, low and thick, built of fitted dark stones whose joints had filled with wind-blown grit over the years. More sand came away, and there it was, the shallow recess of a niche, no larger than Noura had described, set into the surviving wall at shoulder height. Its upper edge remained intact, though one side had cracked. Inside, protected by shadow and burial, the back surface still held a faint wash of blue pigment. Samira stared. Someone long ago had cared enough to paint this hidden place. Beside the wall they uncovered the broken remains of a jar stand. 3 stones, indeed, toppled but unmistakable. The tamarisk was gone, yet the niche itself endured. No one shouted. The moment was too deep for that. Rashid exhaled softly. Haroun ran his fingers along the stone joints with reverence reserved for work honestly done. Noura touched the blue inside the recess, and then her heart. "Welcome back," she murmured, as if speaking to an old friend found after many years rather than to a structure of stone. Samira felt a sudden brightness behind her eyes. She had not known until then how much she wanted the niche to exist. To find it was one thing. To find that it had truly served, truly been made with care, and had simply waited beneath neglect for someone to uncover it. That felt larger, like answering a call she had not known how to name. They spent the rest of the morning clearing the wall enough to understand its shape. The niche had once belonged to a low 3-sided shelter open toward the road, perhaps with a reed roof long vanished. The floor beneath the sand was packed hard and level. Near the back, Haroun found 2 lamp-blackened stones and declared that a small brazier or protected lamp must indeed have been kept there. On the roadside, Rashid unearthed a narrow groove where water from a jar stand might have drained. Samira brushed loose grit from every crevice she could reach, careful not to disturb what should remain. When the sun climbed and the heat began to gather in the stones, they rolled out the reed mats and sat in the slight shade to eat bread, olives and goat cheese. It was a simple meal, yet Samira thought she'd never tasted anything better, perhaps because the place around them now felt earned. Noura said little while eating, which meant her thoughts were moving into arrangement. At length she looked at Haroun. Could it be repaired without falseness? She asked. He considered the wall, the crack, the missing stones. Yes, he said. Not made new, made honest again. The road need not be deceived into thinking nothing happened, but it could be served. Rashid nodded. Then we should serve it. The words settled over the group as naturally as shade. Plans formed in practical steps. Return at first light in 2 days with mortar, 2 fitted stones, a water jar, a small shelf board for oil lamps, and cloth to mark the place while work was underway. Fawzi volunteered to mend a leather hanging strap if one were needed. Samira sat very still, feeling the morning's wonder transform into something steadier. Discovery had been sweet, but this, helping a useful place become useful again, felt deeper. Repairing the lamp niche of Surrey required 2 mornings and part of a third, all of them among the happiest Samira could remember. The work was patient rather than difficult. Haroun reset the cornerstones and filled the worst crack with mortar, mixed to match the old colour as closely as possible. Rashid and Samira cleared sand from the shelter floor and rebuilt the jar stand using the original stones where they still held steady. Nura washed the niche interior with a damp cloth and, after much thought, left the faded blue pigment untouched. "Age is part of truth," she said. Fawzi fastened the leather lamp strap beneath the recess so a lantern could hang, secure on windy evenings. When the main repairs were complete, they set the bound water jar in place under its cloth shade and hung the brass lamp inside the niche wall. It looked so right there that Samira's chest tightened. No one spoke for a moment. The restored shelter did not gleam like something newly made. It looked instead as if the road had exhaled and resumed an old conversation. Before leaving, Nura poured a little water from the jar onto the ground at the threshold. "For the birds, and for remembrance," she said. Samira placed the blue-wrapped stone for an instant in the niche beside the lamp, not because anyone had told her to, but because she wanted the stone to know where it belonged among other remembering things. When she picked it up again, it seemed to hold the day's warmth more deeply than before. Word spread, and with it came a modest shift in the habits of the town. Travellers using the older branch road began to hear that a shaded niche and water jar stood again between the 12th and 13th markers. Some doubted, others were grateful. Rashid arranged for passing caravans to replenish the jar if they used it, and Harun promised to inspect the wall after any major storm. Yet the change went beyond practical care. People started telling stories attached to the niche. A potter recalled being sheltered near it as a child during a dust wind. A widow remembered her father trimming a lamp there on winter evenings. An old shepherd said his mother had once left dried apricots in the recess for late travellers. None of these memories was grand, but together they gave the place a human fullness that Samira found almost overwhelming. She copied each memory onto scraps of paper and tucked them into a small cloth pouch, deciding she would one day make a proper record. Nura approved, though she reminded her that records should accompany care, not replace it. "A written kindness is not the same as a carried jar," she said. So Samira began going with Rashid once every few days at dawn or dusk to check the niche, sweep its floor, refill the water, and polish the lamp glass if dust had dulled it. The walk there and back became its own quiet schooling. She learned how resin shrank in dry heat, how different sands piled after different winds, how to tell whether birds had visited by the shape of prints near the poured water. Each lesson entered her through use rather than instruction, which suited her perfectly. In early autumn, Uthman the listener came through Tazef one last time before winter. Samira found him seated under the east yard awning with a bowl of stewed lentils and a folded blanket beside him. She brought him mint tea without being asked. He accepted it with a small nod, then said before she could speak, "The niche breathes easier now." Samira sat beside him on the packed earth, unconcerned by the bustle around them. "Did the road tell you?" she asked. "Among other things," he replied. "Roads are not stingy when cared for." She told him, in her careful not-too-fast way, about the search, the repair, the lamp, and the visitors who now stopped there. He listened as if each detail mattered. When she finished, he held out his hand. "The stone," he said. She placed it in his palm. His thumb moved once along the faint central line. "It has settled with you," he murmured. "Keep it until another hand needs steadying." He returned it and rose with difficulty, leaning on his pale staff. "Remember this, child of Tezef. The longest journeys across sand are not only made by caravans. Some are made by care, moving from person to person until a road, a town, or a heart is no longer lonely." Then he inclined his head and let a younger traveller guide him toward the well. Samira remained where she was for a moment, the tea tray cooling in her lap, feeling his words descend through her as softly and lastingly as dusk. By the next spring, when new dates were still small and green, and the fig tree in their courtyard had leafed out again, people in Tazef had begun referring to Samira with a phrase half teasing and half respectful. They called her Little Keeper of the East Road. She pretended embarrassment, but secretly the title filled her with a happiness so quiet it was almost difficult to bear. She knew she was still only a girl who kneaded dough, fetched water, minded sisters, and made mistakes in her lessons. She lost needles, forgot salt, and once spilled lamp oil across a tray of figs. Yet she also knew that a person did not need to be grand in order to keep faith with a road. Faith, Nura said, was mostly made of returning. Returning to sweep, to refill, to listen, to greet, to repair, to note what had changed and what remained. On a morning washed clear by recent rain, Samira walked alone to the 7th marker for the first time with her family's blessing. She carried bread, tea, and the blue-wrapped stone. The desert smelled newly awakened, as if every grain of sand had been briefly rinsed and set back more carefully than before. At the marker, she placed the stone on the ground and listened. The footsteps came softly, countless, and calm. Beneath them, she thought she heard another sound too, the delicate clink of a lamp chain moving in a breeze. She smiled, not because she needed proof, but because the world felt large and close at once. She sat there until the sun lifted, warming the carved stone and the backs of her hands. Then she ate a piece of bread and drank sweet tea, looking out over the old road as it curved eastward through light. Somewhere beyond sight lay other markers, other shelters, other towns where children woke before dawn and listened to kettles, camels, wind, and the breathing quiet of houses built around courtyards. Somewhere Yassine might be walking beside a caravan, hearing birds before anyone else did. Somewhere Uthman might be sitting in shade, turning his face toward the road's stored music. And here in Tazef, Nura would soon be kneading dough with her patient hands, leaving room in the morning for Samira to return and tell where the sand had drifted overnight. The thought wrapped around her like a shawl. The long journey across the sand, she understood now, was not one road, and not one traveller. It was the long passage of care itself, moving through time as steadily as footsteps, asking only that someone notice, someone remember, and someone continue. Samira lifted the stone, pressed it once to her palm in gratitude, and rose at last to walk home along the brightening road, her shadow falling before her toward the town that had taught her how to listen and the road that had answered. Our second story begins along a road that wakes beneath moonlight rather than sun, stretching across a desert where the sand lies pale as sifted flour, and the wind combs long silver lines between black stones and sleeping thorn trees. In that wide country, the evening cool arrives slowly, first in the shadows under walls, then in the mouths of wells, then in the breath of camels resting on folded legs, while lanterns are lit one by one along the edges of caravan yards. Beyond the last houses of a town called Kamarin, the old southern route bends away through shallow dunes, salt-white flats, and hidden cisterns roofed in stone, then goes on toward towers built long ago so that tired travellers might find shade by day and a lamp glow after dusk. Some people say those towers are only way stations of plaster and cedar. Others say they listen to the road and ring softly in their sleep when someone kind is coming near. In Kamarin, where courtyards were paved with smooth river tiles and roof parapets caught the first moonrise, there lived a boy of 13 named Idris, who slept beside a rolled saddle blanket in his family's weaving room, and whose favourite sound in all the world was the low clear note of a bronze bell carried on the wind. If this moonlit road already feels calm to your heart, you can softly subscribe and return for more restful desert journeys, filled with quiet wonder, gentle travel, and peaceful stories whenever night is ready to become dreams. Idris woke most mornings to the sound of looms rather than birds. Even before his eyes opened fully, he could hear the household beginning its work in the outer room where dyed wool hung from beams, and the broad floor looms stood near the reed screen for the sake of the best light. The shuttle clicked, the heddles lifted, and the wool threads drew together in a slow, repeating rhythm that seemed to him very like walking. Forward, back, always making something stronger than the separate strands could have been alone. His mother Yasmin was usually the first at the loom. She liked the cool hour before dawn when the dyed yarn showed its truest colours and the rest of the town had not yet filled the air with market sounds. Idris slept on a pallet beside stacked rolls of woven shade cloth because in summer the weaving room stayed cooler than the family sleeping alcove. And because he enjoyed being surrounded by patterns even in dreams, indigo diamonds, rust-coloured borders, little stepped motifs that his grandmother said were shaped like hills seen from far away. On this particular morning he opened his eyes to a darkness only beginning to thin and lay still for a moment, listening beyond the loom. Somewhere in the courtyard a water jar gave a soft clay note as someone lifted its lid. A donkey stamped once in the lane. From a distant roof came the hush of a broom over plaster. Then, after a pause long enough to make the silence feel deliberate, a bell rang from beyond the south gate. One clear note, then another, not hurried, not loud, but so pure that Idris sat up at once. No one else in the house reacted with surprise. The bell had become part of their mornings that week, though not at regular times. It came from the old road tower called the House of the Last Palm, a stopping place 2 days south across the sand and gravel plain. Normally no one in Cameron heard that bell, unless the wind was unusually steady from the south, or unless someone had recently polished the bronze mouth so thoroughly that it seemed to sing farther than before. Yet these last evenings and dawns, under clear skies and mild winds, the note had travelled home again and again, as if the road itself wished to remind the town of something. Idris's grandmother, Amma Ruqayya, said such things happened when a place had been waiting too long for attentive hands. Idris believed her, because Amma Ruqayya rarely said anything she had not first tested against weather, memory and use. She was not his mother's mother, but his father's aunt, already well into her 70s, spare as a desert branch, bright-eyed, and famous in Cameron for weaving bell straps strong enough to survive 12 seasons of caravan dust. She had also once served, many years earlier, as keeper of the House of the Last Palm with her late husband, which meant that whenever the bell sounded from the south she tilted her head, as if hearing an old friend clear its throat. Idris swung his feet to the floor and wrapped his robe around him. He wanted to ask at once whether the bell meant something had happened at the tower, but he had learned from Amma Ruqayya that meaningful sounds deserved a respectful pause before questions rushed in after them. The weaving room smelled of wool, cedar, and the faint mineral coolness that night leaves behind in plaster. Yasmin sat at the loom in a dark green headscarf, her shoulders steady, as drawing a line of sand-coloured thread through a wide panel that would become shadecloth for a caravan rest yard. Idris's little sister Lena slept curled under a blanket in the corner, one hand flung over her cheek. By the lamp niche, Idris's father, Hamid, inspected a bundle of reed poles bound for the market. He repaired awnings and shelter roofs when caravans tore them loose in storms, and his hands were never free of some useful task, knotting rope, oiling hinges, checking pegs, cutting leather ties. Amma Ruqayya sat on a low cushion beneath the window with a basket of bronze bells beside her, and a length of undyed wool across her lap. She was rubbing one bell with a cloth dipped in oil and ash, polishing it with patient circles until the dullness lifted and a hidden gold-brown warmth appeared. When Idris entered, she did not look up immediately. "You heard it," she said, as though she had been expecting his footsteps. "I did," he answered. The bell sounded again, much softer now, as if the road had turned its head away. Yasmin smiled faintly but kept weaving. Hamid glanced toward the south window. "The wind is clean this morning," he said. "It carries farther after a cool night." Idris wanted to agree, but he knew the sound had carried more than distance. It had carried invitation. Breakfast in their house was never elaborate at dawn, yet Idris loved it because everyone lingered for a few breaths before the day scattered them. Yasmin poured warm milk over barley porridge sweetened with date syrup. Hamid tore flatbread into a bowl of olive oil and crushed thyme. Amma Ruqayya added a few grains of salt to her tea and said it made the sweetness wiser. Idris ate quickly at first, then slowed when she gave him a look that was nearly invisible but always effective. The first light came through the reed screen in pale stripes. Dust motes drifted among hanging wool skeins like tiny travellers on their own patient routes. After a quiet while, Amma Ruqayya placed the polished bell back in the basket and said, "The House of the Last Palm will need tending." No one answered immediately. Such statements from her often arrived already shaped by thought, and the family knew better than to interrupt too soon. At last Hamid set down his tea. "You think the keeper has gone?" he asked. "Or the ladder rope is worn, or the lamp glass cracked, or the cistern lid shifted. Or simply the place has grown lonely," she replied. "Neglect announces itself in many voices. Some are louder than others." Idris felt a quickening under his ribs. He knew the tower mostly from stories, and once from a journey taken when he had been very small, so small that he remembered only cool plaster shade, the smell of soaked dates, and a bell note echoing against the inside of his chest. He had asked to go again many times, but the southern route required steady pacing and practical reason, and there had been none strong enough until now. The town sat beside a shallow basin where winter rain sometimes gathered, and where a line of date palms survived along a brackish channel lined with reeds. Houses were plastered in pale clay with blue-painted window frames to cool the eye against summer glare. Roof parapets were edged with little cutouts like crescent moons. Courtyards held jars wrapped in damp cloth, pigeon niches, low benches, and sometimes looms or work tables beneath woven awnings. The southern gate opened toward caravan ground, and beyond it the route to 3 old road towers, of which the House of the Last Palm was the farthest still maintained by Camarin families. Traders, drovers, pilgrims, shepherds, and messengers had once used it often. Now fewer stopped there because a newer well line to the west offered a faster passage for loaded caravans. Yet the old tower remained important in the town's heart. People still sent oil, dried dates, water filters, and spare lamp wicks when they could. In years of dust storms it served as shelter for shepherds. In years of good travel it offered tea, shade, and a quiet roof from which stars could be read without town smoke. Idris had grown up hearing that a road tower should never be abandoned while any town still spoke its name. He had repeated the saying often without knowing what labour it contained. After breakfast, Hamid went to the market yard, Yasmin to her loom, and Lena to lessons with a slate tucked under her arm. Idris was meant to card wool, sort reed strips, and later deliver a packet of indigo thread to the dyer's lane. He did those tasks well enough, yet his attention kept drifting toward Amma Ruqayya's basket of bells, and toward the south beyond the wall. The bell did not ring again that morning, but its absence felt almost as present as its sound. While teasing knots from wool, he imagined the House of the Last Palm standing in sun among low dunes, its bell rope frayed, its cistern dusty, its shade cloth torn by wind into restless strips. While carrying thread to the dyer's, he pictured a tower room with cool jars lined in shadow, and a brass lamp hanging silent until evening. On the way home, he passed the awning market where men inspected camel nosebands and women bargained for cumin, dates, and sesame cakes. Near the gate sat old Bashir, the map seller, who kept route sketches rolled in leather tubes and insisted that every good map began as a memory spoken aloud 3 times. Idris hesitated beside him. "Master Bashir," he asked, "how long to the House of the Last Palm if one walks with pack camels and an elder who does not rush?" Bashir squinted up, his beard full of flour dust from the baker next door. "A proper answer or boastful one?" he said. Idris smiled. "A proper one." Bashir nodded approval. 2 days if you leave before sunrise, sleep at the Chalk Ridge shelter, and stop often enough to notice the road. 1.5 only for fools, and they arrive tired enough to hate what they came to see." Idris thanked him and carried the proper answer home like a bright stone in his pocket. By late afternoon, Amma Ruqayya had made her decision plain. She would go to the House of the Last Palm at first light the next day, taking oil for the tower lamp, a new bell strap, reed patches for the shade awning, dried lentils, tea, and 2 rolls of woven cloth. She would also take Idris. Hamid objected only briefly, not because he doubted his son, but because he knew the road could tire a boy used mostly to town work. Amma Ruqayya answered by pointing out that Idris was tall enough to carry water skins, careful enough not to waste lamp oil, and curious enough to keep his eyes awake. Besides, she said, a child who loves bell sounds should learn what makes them possible. Yasmin, whose practical wisdom ran beneath everything she did, began at once to assemble the things a journey required. Flatbread brushed with butter so it would keep, date paste mixed with sesame, a little sack of figs, cumin salt, wrapped cheese, 2 stoppered flasks of mint tea, and a packet of dried lemon peel against thirst. Idris tried not to grin too openly, but Lena saw through him and demanded a shell from the South Road as payment for her missing the journey. "A smooth one," she said. "Not a broken piece pretending to be interesting," he promised solemnly. That evening the household's ordinary motions took on the quiet brightness of preparation. Hamid checked sandal straps and tightened the buckles on the pack saddle. Yasmin folded light blankets and a wool shawl for night chill. Amma Ruqayya inspected every bell in her basket before selecting 1 small bronze bell with a tone clear as cold water. "This is for the tower ladder," she said. "A place should have a sound of its own. even if no traveller comes for 3 days. Idris held the bell in his palm and felt its weight, modest and certain. Night in Carmarine often arrived with more colour than dawn. The western sky flamed apricot, then deep rose, then a purple so rich it made the first stars look sharp enough to touch. After the evening meal, which was rice with lentils and onions browned until sweet, the family climbed to the roof to catch the better breeze. Neighbours spoke softly across parapets. Somewhere in the lane below, a baby laughed and then was hushed. The smell of warm brick, tea and distant bread ovens rose through the air. Idris lay on his back beside the rolled travel blankets and looked toward the south, trying to imagine tomorrow's road in segments he could understand. Gate, gravel flats, tamarisk well, chalk ridge shelter, dawn again, then the tower. It seemed both near and very far, the way meaningful places often do. Amma Ruqayya sat near the parapet mending the leather loop on a bell harness. After a time she said, without turning, "Do not expect the road to entertain you every hour." Idris propped himself on one elbow. "I know." "Do you?" She smiled into her stitches. Many children think a journey must keep proving itself with marvels, or they call it dull. But a long road gives its best lessons between bright moments, in heat, in waiting, in watching an elder tie the same knot properly every time. Idris considered this. He knew she was right, though some part of him still hoped for marvels. "Will the tower bell really ring by itself?" he asked. Amma Ruqayya's needle flashed in moonlight. "Nothing rings by itself," she said. "Wind moves. Metal answers. Old care remains in the shape of a place. A person hears all that and calls it magic if he likes. I do not object." Idris settled back onto the roof mat, pleased by an answer that made room for both truth and wonder. They left before sunrise, with one donkey carrying the heavier bundles and Idris carrying, with enormous seriousness, the wrapped bell, a skin of water, and the small brass tin that held spare lampwicks. The town still slept in pockets. A baker's apprentice knelt blowing on coals. Our one gate guard stood wrapped in a striped cloak. Cats moved like poured ink along the base of walls. Above them the last stars lingered. The southern gate opened onto a broad wash of gravel and pale sand, where caravan tracks braided and separated like lines on an old palm. Idris looked back once to see Cameron's roofs lying low and blue-edged against the paling east. Then he turned toward the road. The first stretch was easy under the cool dawn. Their sandals made a soft crush sound on the ground, and the donkey's hoofs clicked now and then against scattered stone. Amma Ruqayya walked with a staff of polished palmwood and a pace so steady that Idris, after trying twice to range ahead and then falling back, understood he would do best simply by matching her. The sky brightened through pearl, then honey. Small desert birds rose from thorn bushes and skimmed low before settling again. At the first roadside cistern, roofed by a domed cap of plaster half hidden by sand, they paused to drink and splash their wrists. The water tasted faintly of stone and iron. "Always greet a cistern before you use it," Amma Ruqayya said. So Idris laid his hand on the cool rim and whispered thanks. This pleased her enough that she said nothing for the next quarter hour, which he knew was one of her ways of offering approval. As the morning widened, the land changed by slow degrees. The gravel flats gave way to long, low dunes streaked with darker mineral bands. Here and there, squat acacias stood with flattened crowns, their shade no bigger than a folded blanket. The route was marked by standing stones in some places, by old wheel ruts in others, and sometimes by nothing more visible than the absence of hindrance, a corridor of easier ground between thorn patches and sinky sand. Idris had imagined road travel as one continuous movement forward, yet he soon discovered it was made of many smaller attentions, shifting the water skin from one shoulder to the other before numbness set in, adjusting his scarf against glare, noticing when the donkey's load began to lean, watching where last week's wind had piled drift ridges across the track. Amma Ruqayya saw everything. She stopped once to tighten a strap before it chafed, once to lift a stone from the donkey's hoof path, once to point out a cluster of tiny purple flowers blooming where rain had lingered in a hollow no larger than a bowl. "The road is not separate from the places beside it," she said. "If you only watch your feet, you miss half your guidance." They ate a first small meal mid-morning under a tamarisk whose roots had found enough hidden damp to stay green. The bread had softened pleasantly in its cloth. Idris drank mint tea now gone lukewarm, and thought it tasted better outdoors than any tea at home. Far away, a caravan shimmered northward, as no more than moving strokes against the light. He watched until it disappeared. The silence after it went seemed fuller than before. By noon the sun had grown white and broad above them. Heat did not crush so much as settle, layer by layer, over skin, cloth, stone, and thought. The road at that hour could make distances seem mischievous, bringing them close in the eye and leaving them far in the legs. Idris felt this keenly. The Chalk Ridge shelter, which Bashir had described as if it were merely the next sentence in a story, remained a pale line on the horizon no matter how long they walked toward it. Yet Amma Ruqayya did not complain, and because she did not, Idris tried not to allow his own weariness to grow theatrical. They found a ledge of stone casting thin shade and rested there while the donkey cropped at dry scrub. Idris removed his sandals, rubbed his feet, and leaned his head back against the warm rock. The heat made the air smell of minerals, dust, and the faint sweetness of sun-baked grass. He asked whether Amma Ruqayya had ever grown tired of this road in all her years. She smiled without opening her eyes. "Often," she said, "and then I return to it anyway. Tiredness is not the same as dislike. Sometimes it's simply the price of arriving with your senses still awake." She handed him a strip of dried apricot. "Eat slowly. Fast hunger makes the day longer." Idris obeyed. The apricot tasted of sunshine stored carefully and released in small pieces. By late afternoon they reached the Chalk Ridge shelter, a low white outcrop undercut by wind into a shallow crescent, big enough for 3 travellers and 2 animals to rest in shade. Someone in recent weeks had swept part of the floor clear and left a neat pile of camel thorn kindling against the back wall. Idris felt instantly comforted by that anonymous orderliness. It made the desert seem not empty but courteously shared. They watered the donkey, spread one woven cloth on the ground, and prepared the evening meal before the light faded. Lentils simmered in a blackened pot with cumin, and dried onion and a spoon of tomato paste wrapped in waxed cloth. Bread warmed against a flat stone. Tea brewed with mint and a little crushed cardamom. The smell of it all drifted out from the shelter and mingled with cooling rock and the first breath of evening. Idris had never thought lentils tasted luxurious until he ate them after a day of walking. Above the ridge the sky turned clear amber and then gently blue. When the first stars appeared, Amma Ruqayya hung the small bronze bell from a peg driven years ago into the stone wall. A breeze moved through the shelter and the bell answered with a low note, softer than the one from the distant tower but cut from the same patient kind of sound. "Every stopping place needs a voice," she said. Idris wrapped his blanket around his shoulders and listened. He was tired through his calves and shoulders, yet inside the tiredness there was a smooth contentment he had never found in town. That night they slept under the shelter lip where they could see the stars framed by chalk-white stone. Idris woke once when the donkey shifted and heard Amma Ruqayya humming under her breath, not because she was awake, he thought, but because some old tune had followed her into sleep. The stars above the desert seemed both sharper and kinder than those seen from a town roof. Without walls or parapets nearby, the sky felt vast in a way that did not make him small so much as included. In the distance a fox barked once, then silence returned like a folded blanket being laid down. Idris touched the wrapped bronze bell beside his pillow and drifted back to sleep, imagining the house of the last palm listening for them from somewhere south, its own bell suspended in darkness, waiting for a hand or wind or memory to stir it again. They rose while the stars were still strong. Morning on the open road came colder than Idris expected. He pulled his shawl tightly across his chest and blew into his hands, while Amma Ruqayya rekindled last night's embers with practised patience. They drank tea sweetened more than usual because she said dawn walking asked for kindness. The chalk ridge blushed rose as the east brightened. Soon they were on the move again, the donkey's ears silvered by early light. This second day's land was harsher and gentler at once. Tigol, the dunes lowered into rippling plains of hardpan crossed by salt seams that shone almost white. Here the road towers made sense to Idris in a new way. Without them, without cisterns and known shade, A person might walk through such openness and lose measure of time itself. The stillness had few landmarks beyond scattered black stones and far hills wavering in heat haze. Even sound travelled differently. Their own footsteps seemed to remain near them, but bird calls arrived from surprising distances, and once the clatter of another donkey somewhere unseen moved across the flat like a line drawn on glass. Mid-morning they came upon an old woman resting beside 2 goats, under a thorn awning no larger than a table. She was bound north for Camarin to visit a daughter who had recently born twins. Ama Ruqayya shared tea. Idris filled the woman's cup carefully and was thanked with a blessing for steady feet. Such meetings, brief and practical, stitched the road into something almost domestic. When they walked on, Idris glanced back and saw the woman sitting in her patch of shade as calmly as if she were in her own courtyard. The house of the last palm appeared first as a line too straight to be natural, then as a pale block rising from a shelf of stone beside one solitary date palm bent permanently west by years of wind. Idris stopped without meaning to. The tower was smaller than in his childhood memory and more beautiful. It stood 2 stories high, square and thick-walled, with a shaded lean-to on its north side, a cistern court enclosed by low-plaster walls, and a roof parapet pierced by narrow openings where evening wind could pass without striking too hard. The famous bell hung beneath a cedar crossbeam above the stair hatch, and even from a distance Idris could see that the leather strap holding it had cracked pale with age. Around the base of the tower lay drifting fans of sand, but the main doorway remained clear. Someone, then, had passed this way not long ago. Yet the place held an unmistakable air of waiting. The plaster showed hairline cracks. One corner of the awning sagged. The solitary palm's fronds whispered over the roof in a dry, tired voice. Idris felt the peculiar happiness of arriving somewhere that was both new to his feet and familiar to his imagination. Ama Ruqayya stood beside him and adjusted the bundle on her shoulder. "There you are," she said softly. "And not to him, but to the tower." Then they walked the last stretch without haste, as if approaching a resting elder who might wake if spoken to too briskly. Up close the tower smelled of plaster, heated stone, dust, and a trace of old lamp smoke sheltered in cracks. Idris set down the bundles in the narrow shade and followed Ama Ruqayya through the first careful inspection. The cistern lid was intact, but one hinge pin had slipped. The water inside, when they drew a bucket, was clean though low. The shade awning had torn where a tie rope rubbed through on the east corner. 3 clay cups stood upside down on the shelf, dusty but unbroken. In the lower room, the plaster bench was sound, the rolled reed mats dry, the lamp niche empty except for a crust of old oil. Upstairs, reached by a narrow stair, the roof room looked south across miles of pale ground to low brown ridges. There hung the bell, green-brown with age, its lip still true, its strap indeed frayed almost through. Idris reached toward it and stopped until Ama Ruqayya nodded permission. The metal felt cool in the shade. "Not abandoned," she said, reading the place with her eyes and fingertips. "Only too long between faithful visits." She lifted the bell gently. It gave a note so pure that Idris felt it along his arms. Then, as if answering, a small desert dove hidden somewhere in the parapet openings began to coo. Idris laughed softly. The tower did not feel lonely now that they had climbed inside it. It felt relieved. Work began at once because that was Ama Ruqayya's answer to nearly every meaningful arrival. Idris fetched water and scrubbed the lower room shelves with a rag until the wood showed its grain again. He swept sand from corners, shook dust from the reed mats, and spread them to air in the courtyard sun. Ama Ruqayya climbed with surprising steadiness to the roof and removed the old bell strap. Idris carried up the new one, woven from leather and wool with a bronze ring reinforced at the strain points. Together they fixed it in place, her fingers nimble despite age, his fingers clumsy at first and then better under her guidance. A bell must hang free enough to speak, but not so loose that wind batters it into foolishness, she said. Most useful things ask for that same balance. They rehung the bell and polished the clapper pin. Idris wanted to ring it immediately, but she sent him instead to reset the slipped cistern hinge with a wedge of wood Hamid had packed. By noon he was streaked with dust and sweat, yet happy. Small changes made the tower seem to stand straighter. The awning, once patched and retied, cast a cleaner shadow. The lower room smelled less stale. When he poured the first fresh water into the clay cups and set them in a row near the entrance, the simple sight pleased him beyond reason. After a midday meal of bread, cheese and figs eaten on the north side where the shade held longest, they rested in silence. Idris lay on one of the reed mats and watched light move across the ceiling in thin bands through the upper vent. The tower made different sounds from a house. Wind passed through its openings with a low throat-like murmur. Plaster clicked when heat shifted. The bell rope brushed the wall now and then with a whisper of fibre. Farther away, the palm leaves scraped together in slow, dry phrases. Idris felt sleep approaching and resisted it, only because he did not want to miss anything. Amma Ruqayya sat by the door mending a cup handle with resin and cord, as calm as if she had all the afternoons of her life still ahead of her. "Did you ever live here all year?" Idris asked eventually. She nodded. "For 2 years, and 1 winter besides, before your father married. Your granduncle Harith kept the cistern records, and I kept the lamp, supplies, and shade cloth. In storm season we had shepherds every 3rd night. In clear months perhaps no one for days. Then suddenly 6 travellers, 1 baby, 2 nervous donkeys, and a woman with a basket of pomegranates would arrive at sunset as if the road had planned a joke." Idris smiled at the image. "Were you lonely?" he asked. She tied the resin cord in a hard, tiny knot. "Sometimes, but useful loneliness is different from empty loneliness. If a place needs you, your quiet hours do not hollow out in the same way." Idris let that settle inside him, while the wind moved across the roof and the bell gave one brief thoughtful click. Toward late afternoon, they made the tower ready not merely for themselves, but for whoever might come after. Idris filled the jar stand with clean cups, spread 1 spare blanket on the lower bench, and arranged a little dish of dates beneath a cloth cover to keep flies away. Amma Ruqayya cleaned the brass lamp until it shone a deep honey colour and trimmed a fresh wick. Then she sent Idris to gather dry thorn branches from the lee side of the dunes for evening tea. He went gladly, enjoying the excuse to walk a little alone around the tower and see it from different angles. From the south side, the structure looked almost like a square sail planted in the desert. From the west, he could see how the bent palm cast a narrow ribbon of shade that touched the wall at sunset. In the sand near the outer step, he found old tracks. Sandals, goat hooves, 1 small lizard scribble, and the broad, rounded print of a camel that must have stopped perhaps a day or 2 earlier. Beside the print lay something half buried. Idris knelt and uncovered a bead of blue glass, worn cloudy by sand. He turned it in his fingers, thinking of some traveller's torn cuff or loosened amulet, then placed it on the inner shelf by the cups so that if its owner returned they might recognise it. When he came back with an armful of thornwood, Amma Ruqayya approved of both the fuel and the blue bead's new resting place. "A road keeps many things," she said. "A keeper must learn which to preserve, which to return, and which to let the wind claim." At sunset they lit the lamp and rang the bell 3 times, not loudly, simply enough to tell the evening that the house of the last palm had company again. The notes travelled outward over the cooling sand and seemed not to diminish so much as widen. Idris stood on the roof beside Amma Ruqayya, his hand still tingling from the rope. The sky to the west held long bars of apricot and pale lavender. Shadows from the dunes grew blue. Somewhere far north, a tiny reflected flash suggested another traveller's lamp, or perhaps only the sun striking glass. The bell notes faded. Then, after a pause, the wind shifted and carried back an answering sound so faint, Idris could not tell whether it was a real bell from some distant animal harness, or the road returning the tower's own voice in softened memory. He looked at Amma Ruqayya, but she only smiled and said, "Yes, it still speaks well." They drank tea on the roof while darkness gathered. The tea smelled of mint and smoke from the thornwood fire below. Idris had never felt evening descend so gradually. In town, lamps, voices, neighbours, and walls all shaped the arrival of the night. Here, the stars took over one by one, the horizons dissolved into gentle absence, and the tower lamp cast a modest circle that seemed enough because the world beyond it was calm rather than empty. Just after full dark, travellers arrived. Idris heard the soft clink of harness bells first, then the scrape of hooves on stone, then a woman's voice soothing an animal with tired patience. He hurried down with the lamp while Ama Rukaya went to the doorway. A small family emerged from the darkness. A mother and father, a girl of about 9 asleep against a rolled bundle, and a boy a little older than Lena leading 2 donkeys burdened with baskets of dried herbs. They were southbound for a village beyond the ridges where the mother's sister was ill. Dust covered everything they carried. The father looked near collapse with weariness and relief. When he saw the lit tower and the cups waiting, his face changed completely. "We feared it might be closed," he said. "The last traveller we met was not sure anyone still kept this place." Ama Rukaya answered with the simple courtesy of the road. "Then be sure now, come in. Water first, questions later." Idris felt a flush of pride so strong it made him stand taller. He brought water, spread the second mat, and handed the older boy a date while pretending not to stare at how road-worn their clothes were. The girl woke long enough to drink and then slept again with her head in her mother's lap. Together they shared lentils reheated with extra water, bread and tea. No one spoke much beyond what was necessary because the family was tired in the deep road, way that leaves gratitude but little speech. Yet the lower room filled with that unmistakable gentle fullness which comes when shelter is being rightly used. Later, after the family settled and the donkeys were tied in the awning shade, Idris climbed once more to the roof and looked at the stars with a satisfaction unlike any he had known. The tower had not needed admiration. It had needed light, water, and hands. The family left after dawn with many blessings, but not before the mother pressed into Idris's palm a little twist of dried mountain mint from her herb baskets. "For your tea when you remember this place," she said. He tucked it carefully beside the spare wicks. That morning and the next passed in useful repetition. They checked the cistern, swept the lower room, retied the awning, rubbed the bell with oil, brewed tea, and watched the road. 2 shepherd boys came at midday for water and left a lump of goat cheese in thanks. A messenger on a fast donkey stopped only long enough to refill a skin and tighten his sandal thong. A caravan of 4 camels passed far to the west and did not approach, yet one rider lifted a hand in greeting when the bell rang at sunset. Idris began to understand the tower's rhythm, not as waiting for excitement, but as holding readiness across emptiness. Every task repeated with slight variation. Sand gathered again in corners and was swept out again. Water lowered and was drawn again. Cups were rinsed, lamp glass wiped, shade checked, rope tested, bread warmed. The sameness of these actions did not dull him. Instead, it deepened the place. He liked the way morning sunlight struck the upper stair first, the way the bent palm's shadow crossed the cistern wall at noon, the way evening wind always came a few breaths before the bell's rope stirred. Once, while polishing the bell lip, he noticed faint marks scratched inside the cedar beam above it, little lines and dots made over many years by previous keepers, recording seasons of repair. Ama Rukaya read them with her fingers. "Your granduncle's hand, and mine, and one from old Safa before us." Idris traced the newest empty space beside them, and felt time opening like another room. On the 3rd night a dust wind came, not fierce enough to threaten the tower, but strong enough to turn the horizon amber and send fine grains whispering against the walls. Idris and Ama Rukaya lowered the awning cloth, covered the cups, sealed the lower vent and tied a scarf over the bell so it would not chatter foolishly all night. The wind pressed and hissed and moved around them like a creature too large to be seen whole. Inside the tower room the lamp burned steadily, its light gold on the plaster. Idris expected to feel fear in such weather, but instead he felt strangely sheltered, almost folded into the tower's competence. Ama Rukaya sat near the stair with her mending basket and told him stories of other winds while she worked. The year a spring storm brought yellow dust so fine it entered even sealed jars. The evening a caravan of dye merchants arrived, looking as though their robes had been sugared. The winter night she and Harith sheltered 3 orphaned lambs in the lower room, and woke to find one sleeping in the bread basket. Idris laughed softly, the sound staying close in the lamplit room. "Did the tower ever seem alive to you?" he asked when the laughter faded. The wind gave a long sigh along the outer wall. Ama Rukaya considered before answering. "Alive in the way a well is alive, perhaps. Alive in usefulness. alive because many people have depended on it, and left some measure of themselves behind. Places can become full in that way. She looked toward the ceiling where the bell, muffled under its scarf, made no sound. And when a place like that is neglected, the fullness does not vanish. It only waits. Idris looked around the room differently after that. The shelf, the cups, the worn stair edges, the niche where the lamp sat, each seemed touched by former hands, not in sadness but in company. By the next morning the wind had passed and the world beyond the tower looked washed, though no water had fallen. The air turned astonishingly clear. Distant ridges sharpened. The bent palm leaves gleamed on their edges. Sand lay newly combed in curving lines that made the road almost easier to read than before. Idris untied the scarf from the bell, and when a little breeze moved through, it rang once with such sweetness that both he and Amarukaya laughed aloud. It was waiting for the dust to settle, he said. As sensible bells do, she replied. They shared a breakfast of bread, cheese, and tea, scented with the gift mint from the southbound mother's basket, and Idris thought no tea in Kamarin would ever taste quite like this one. During the quieter afternoon he asked whether they might stay one more night rather than return at once. He expected refusal because supplies were thinning and town work awaited them, but Amarukaya surprised him. "One more," she said. "A tower should not be left the morning after its first proper breathing. We will listen through one more sunset and go at dawn tomorrow." Idris tried to hide his delight and failed. That evening they climbed to the roof before lighting the lamp and sat shoulder to shoulder watching the light lower across the plains. The bell moved a little in the wind above them. Idris told her he had thought long journeys were mainly about reaching a place he could name. Now it seemed they were also about making the place more itself when one arrived. Amarukaya nodded, as if he had finally pronounced a familiar word correctly. "And making yourself more yourself along the way," she added. "If the road is decent and you're listening." After sunset, with the lamp lit and the tower quiet, Idris discovered the small mystery that would remain his own. He had gone downstairs to fetch the extra blanket when he heard, from somewhere inside the wall, a faint chiming unlike the bell above. It was lighter, almost silvery, and lasted only a moment. He stood still and heard it again, not from the roof, not from the cups, but from behind the plaster near the stair turn. Calling softly for Amarukaya, he knelt and pressed his ear to the wall. She listened too, then smiled in immediate recognition. "The hidden wind channel," she said. "I had forgotten. Harith made it after our first year here." With careful hands she lifted a small wooden panel, no bigger than a tray from the stair wall, revealing a cavity where a row of tiny shell discs and metal rings hung on threads. When wind passed through a narrow slit in the outer wall, it touched them and made the faintest music. For nights when the bell must be wrapped or still, she said, so the tower would never be entirely voiceless. Idris stared. The shells were pale pink, cream and smoke grey, likely gathered long ago from a far northern shore, and each had been pierced and tied with dyed thread now faded almost white. "Why hide them?" he asked. "Because not all music is for announcing itself," Amarukaya replied. "Some is only to keep company with the keeper." They left the panel open a little while and listened as the evening breeze moved through. The tiny chimes sounded like remembered laughter heard across another room. Idris felt then that the House of the Last Palm had given him not a marvel to boast about, but an intimacy to protect. He promised himself he would keep the secret as carefully as a wick flame. When dawn came for their return, Idris felt the gentle ache of leaving a place he had only just begun to know properly. Yet departure, he discovered, could be its own quiet pleasure when the place left behind was ready. They washed the cups, swept the floor, covered the dates, checked the awning, filled the water jars as high as the cistern allowed, and set a note in a clay tube near the doorway for any town visitor arriving after them. Lamp trimmed, bell strap renewed, cups 3, mats 2, water fair, shade secure, shell chimes hidden but well. Idris smiled at the last line, though no stranger would know what it meant. Before they stepped away, Amarukaya rang the bell once. The note spread over the morning plain as if blessing their backs. Idris turned for one last look. The tower stood clear and attentive in the early sun. Not lonely now, not exactly waiting either, but participating. One more useful mind in the long conversation of the road. He felt grateful enough that words would have been clumsy. So he only laid his hand briefly on the door lintel as he had done at the cistern days before and whispered thanks. The return journey felt shorter, though the miles were the same. Idris's body had learned the pace. He shifted water skins before they bit into his shoulder, loosened the donkey's strap before it rubbed, and drank before thirst turned dull and stubborn. Amma Ruqayya noticed without praising too directly. "You're beginning to walk like someone who expects to arrive," she said around midday. Idris considered the compliment for a while before realizing how large it was. At the Chalk Ridge shelter they found the small bronze bell still hanging from its peg. Idris polished it lightly with his sleeve before ringing it once in greeting. The note seemed to welcome them back from the farther tower. They ate lentils again, this time thinner and more fragrant with dried lemon peel. A line of clouds had appeared in the west, high and delicate, and the shade under the chalk seemed cooler than on their first night. Idris told Amma Ruqayya about the blue bead he had placed on the tower shelf and asked whether every road place gathered such little remnants. "Of course," she said. "A road is partly built from what falls out of ordinary life. Buttons, stories, dropped grain, greetings, mended straps, remembered songs. The wise do not despise small traces. They are often what let you read what passed before you came." So after they ate, Idris walked a small circle around the shelter and noticed things he had overlooked before. A pattern scratched absent-mindedly into the chalk wall by someone's knife point, a bit of braided goat hair caught on a stone, a pebble pile left perhaps by a child making her own marker. The road back to Cameron grew fuller with every such noticing. They reached the town at sunset on the second day, just as the roofs took on roselight and the market smell of frying chickpeas drifted into the lanes. Lena met them halfway from the house. Having escaped her lessons as soon as word spread that they were near the gate, she demanded first the promised shell. Idris gave her two, one smooth pale shell from the hidden chime rose repair basket, gifted by Amma Ruqayya for exactly this purpose, and one rougher striped shell found near the tower step. Lena declared the smooth one superior, as predicted. Yasmin embraced Idris with the practical thoroughness of a mother verifying that all parts of him had returned. Hamid unloaded the donkey and listened, while pretending not to be impatient, to the first hurried outline of what they had found. The worn strap, the patched awning, the travellers, the hidden chimes, the tower bell's voice after the storm. That evening the weaving room felt smaller than before, but not in a disappointing way. It felt dear. The porridge, bread, and stewed squash tasted wonderfully abundant after road meals. The loom's click seemed like a cousin to the bell, that Idris kept wanting to say at every ordinary object, "This too is part of making shelter possible." He slept heavily that night and dreamed not of wandering farther south, but of cups lined ready on a shelf while wind moved through shell chimes in the wall. In the days that followed, he discovered that returning from a road did not end the journey if the road had entered one's habits. He helped Yasmin at the loom, with greater patience, because he now understood how shade cloth might look once tied at a tower awning. He watched Hamid repair reed poles, and knew exactly how a bad knot could become a torn corner 3 days later in desert wind. He began polishing bells for Amma Ruqayya in the evenings, rubbing each lip and clapper until the tone brightened. She taught him how different metals answered differently to weather, how bell leather should be softened with oil but never left greasy, how a strap too ornate for the road quickly became a nuisance. "Beauty is welcome," she said, "but it must travel well." Idris repeated this phrase until Lena mocked him gently for sounding old. Yet she also followed him about asking when she might be allowed to see the House of the Last Palm herself, which he considered a fair sign that his stories had done the place justice. He told no one beyond the family about the hidden shell chimes, not because the secret was heavy, but because it felt tender and properly partial. Weeks later, when the moon was almost full and the air had cooled enough for roof sleeping again, the bell from the south carried to Cameron once more. Idris, who had been dozing beside the rolled awnings, woke at the first note and sat up smiling even before the second came. He could tell from the sound that the strap held firm and the lip was clean. Perhaps a traveller had rung it. Perhaps the wind had found the right angle. Perhaps both. Across the roof, Amma Ruqayya, wrapped in a striped blanket, opened one eye and said, "Well?" Idris listened to the fading note. It no longer struck him as a mysterious summons from beyond his life. It sounded now like continuity, like work continuing at a distance, like a friend not forgotten. "Is speaking well," he said. Amarukaya nodded and shut her eye again. The moonlight silvered the parapet cutouts. Somewhere a donkey shifted in its yard below. Idris lay back, the bell's echo still present in his chest, and felt the strange peacefulness of belonging at once to his town and to the open road beyond it. When autumn came deeper and caravans thickened on the southern approach, Hamid announced that another supply run should go to the House of the Last Palm before winter winds. This time he would send Idris with 2 other adults and a small pack camel, carrying new filter cloth, dried beans, lamp oil, and a rolled reed screen. Idris accepted the news more quietly than he would once have done. He was glad, certainly, but his gladness had changed shape. It no longer leaped about inside him, demanding marvels. It settled, steady and warm, like coals banked well for morning. Before the journey, he sat with Amarukaya, sorting bells in the courtyard shade. She handed him the small bronze bell from the chalk ridge shelter and said, Take this farther south and leave it there. The middle road should have a voice of its own while the tower keeps hers. Idris rubbed the bell with ash and oil until it glowed. I'll hang it well, he promised. I know, she said. You have learned that a voice carries only when someone tends the hanging. He thought about that long after the words were spoken. Around them, the courtyard smelled of damp reed mats, pomegranate peel drying on a tray, and cumin from the kitchen. Above, a line of laundry moved gently in the breeze like small sails preparing for a patient crossing. By then, people in Carmarin had begun to ask Idris practical questions about the southern route. Was the cistern low? Did the awning hold? Had any shepherds mentioned the ridgewells silting? He answered carefully, pleased not by importance but by usefulness. Well, one evening, old Bashir the map seller asked him to mark on a route sketch where the bent palm's shadow reached at noon in late summer. Idris did so with a charcoal point, proud of the precision he could now offer. Good, Bashir murmured. Maps improve when someone has actually sat in the shade they draw. Idris understood exactly what he meant. Memory alone was not enough. Neither was admiration from afar. A long journey across the sand became truthful when footsteps, hands, weather, and care all entered it together. One soft evening near the first date harvest, Idris climbed to the highest roof with Lena and watched the south darken under moonrise. The town below moved through its gentle nightly routines, bowls being washed, lamps trimmed, a lullaby from one courtyard, laughter from another, the muted thump of rugs shaken clean. Far beyond, invisible but powerfully present in his mind, stood the House of the Last Palm with its repaired awning. Clean cups, lamp niche, bent tree, and shell chime secret hidden in the wall. He told Lena how the stars looked from the tower roof, how the wind sounded after a dust storm, how travellers' faces changed when they saw a lit place waiting. Lena listened with unusual stillness, then leaned against his shoulder. It sounds far, she said. It is, Idris answered, and not so far. She accepted this because it made sense in the way true things sometimes do before they can be explained. After a while, the bell rang from the south, faint, clear, perfectly shaped by distance. Idris closed his eyes. The sound seemed to travel through the moonlight itself, over the dunes, across the gravel, through the gate, and up to the roof where he sat. He thought of the road towers, cisterns, shade cloths, cups, bells, knots, stories, and hands that joined one another across open land. The long journey across the sand was not only the movement of animals and people from one town to the next. It was the longer movement of care, carried outward and carried back, so that no useful place need fall silent for want of remembering. Idris listened until the note faded completely, then sat a little longer beside his sister in the mild night breeze, feeling the desert beyond Carmarin breathe in patient darkness, and knowing, with a calm deeper than excitement, that one day he would answer that bell again. Our third story begins at the western edge of the caravan world, where the dunes lean close to an oasis town called Ramallah, and the evenings smell of mint, warm dates, and stone that has been quietly cooling since noon. We will walk beside an 11-year-old girl named Zaina, who listens more carefully than most grown people notice, and beside an old woman named Sabiha, whose hands remember roads the way palms remember water. Their story begins not with hurry, and not with alarm, but with a folded cloth map, a brass key gone soft with years, and a courtyard that has been sleeping so patiently beneath veils of sand that even the lizards pass it as though it were dreaming. There will be moonlight on pale tiles, woven screens stirring in night air, copper cups set out for strangers, and a kind of magic so gentle that it feels almost like good manners. If your own day has been long, let it loose now. The road ahead is wide, the stars are untroubled, and this is a story meant to be walked slowly, with the heart resting as lightly as a bird at dusk. If you would like to keep wandering through these calm desert nights with stories like this, you can softly subscribe, return whenever evening grows quiet, and let the road find you again beneath the stars. Zane awoke each morning before the sun entered the family courtyard, not because anyone called her, but because Rimala had its own mild language of waking, and she'd grown into hearing it. First came the faint clink of glazed jars as her mother, Basma, checked the damp cloths wrapped around them. Then came the brush of a broom against brick, on a patient sound that moved from one side of the courtyard to the other, as neatly as if it were folding the dawn. Somewhere nearby a pigeon shifted in its niche. Somewhere farther away a baker tapped dough from one palm to the other, with a rhythm soft enough to be mistaken for a dream. Zaina slept on a low bed under a cotton cover dyed the colour of apricot skins, and before she opened her eyes she liked to lie still and let the town gather around her. Rimala was built where 3 roads loosened themselves and came to drink. One from the east, where marker stones watched the long distances, one from the south, where watchtowers and bell houses stood above the flats, and one from the west, where tamarisk groves hid shallow basins and the last light of evening lingered on white clay walls. The town had courtyards with fig trees, alleys cool as folded cloth, awnings striped in faded indigo, and roofs where families slept when the hot months were deep. In her house lived Basma, who blended rose, cardamom and orange peel into little cones of perfume paste, Yunus, who made baskets tight enough to carry grain without a single seed escaping, Karim, her younger brother, whose questions arrived in strings, and great-aunt Sabiha, who was 77 and moved as slowly as poured honey, yet somehow finished twice as much work as anyone else. Sabiha occupied the room nearest the roof stair because she said old people should sleep where the night sky could look in on them without obstruction. Her room always smelled faintly of cedar, lamp smoke and indigo thread. She embroidered maps, hairs, though not the sort sold to impatient traders who wanted only numbers of wells and names of markets. Her maps were stitched onto cloths the size of shawls and table covers. She sewed roads in long lines of blue silk, resting places in tiny knots of silver, orchards in green dashes, cisterns in circles no bigger than lentils, and old stories in borders so delicate that strangers sometimes mistook them for decoration. But Sabiha would tap such a border with her needle and say, "No, this is where one should stop at sunset because the stones hold coolness." Or, "This bend means the road smells of fennel after rare rain." Or, "Here an old fig tree once leaned over a basin, and even if the tree is gone, the place still teaches shade." Zaina loved these cloth maps with a love that was nearly reverence. When Sabiha worked, she did not hurry or squint or complain of her back. She sat on a low cushion with her legs folded beneath her, the cloth spread across her lap, and laid each stitch as though she were greeting a guest. Sometimes Zaina threaded needles for her. Sometimes she sorted silk by shade, separating dusk blue from evening blue, moon silver from pale shell. Often she simply watched. Sabiha said watching was not empty if the eyes were sincere. The day the old key appeared began with dates drying on reed trays and ended with moonlight on dust. In the late afternoon, Basma sent Karim to return a borrowed spice bowl, and Yunus carried finished baskets to the market gate, and the house became temporarily still. Zaina sat with Sabiha beneath the narrow shade of the courtyard vine, sorting thread into wooden boxes. The heat had begun to leave the walls. A shallow dish of soaked almonds rested between them. Sabiha was working on a cloth meant for a wedding chest, not a travel map, yet even its borders seemed to wander. Without warning, she paused, set down her needle, and looked toward the cedar chest at the end of her room, the oldest object in the house besides herself, as Karim sometimes said before being shushed. Her face altered only slightly, but Zaina felt the change. Sabiha was a woman who carried memory without spilling it, and whenever something old called to her from the past, the air around her grew attentive. She asked Zaina to fetch the chest key hanging on the wall peg. Inside the chest lay folded shawls, a wool cloak, A packet of letters tied with green thread, a brass lamp with a bent leaf handle, and at the very bottom a cloth bundle wrapped in faded blue. Sabia opened the bundle and drew out two things: a long brass key on a ring of plaited cord, and a square of dark indigo linen embroidered so densely that it glittered whenever she tilted it. Zaina leaned close. What she first mistook for a border of tiny crescents and stars was in fact a plan of a courtyard, complete with 7 narrow basins, 2 date palms, 4 sleeping platforms, and a tiny gate painted in copper thread. Sabiha laid the cloth across her knees and touched one embroidered corner with a fingertip. "This," she said, "is the court of sleeping water." Her voice was calm but not casual. Zaina had heard many place names from her aunt, yet not this one. Sabiha explained that the court lay west of town, not on the main road itself, but slightly aside from it, where a grove of tamarisk once held the dusk wind in its branches. Long ago, before Zaina was born and before even Kareem's mischief could be imagined, travellers used to turn aside there at evening. They washed dust from their feet in shallow basins that filled from a narrow seep hidden in the stone, spread bedding on raised platforms and slept behind reed screens while the courtyard walls cooled around them. No grand inn had stood there, only a place of quiet hospitality. Lamps once hung in the arches, mint once grew in clay troughs. Children were once asked to carry bowls of soaked apricots to passing families. Sabiha herself had stayed there as a girl with her own mother on a road journey toward the western fig orchards. Later, after she married, and later still after she was widowed, she helped keep the place for 3 seasons with her elder sister. But then dunes shifted, and one road line became more popular. A richer guest house near a town drew passing merchants. The seep thinned beneath drifted sand. People said they would restore the court another year, and because everyone meant it kindly, and no one meant it soon, the place fell asleep. Zaina asked why Sabiha had not spoken of it before. Sabiha smiled in the small, private way she used when speaking to memory itself. Some places, she said, are easier to miss aloud than to lose entirely. The cloth map had been put away after her sister's last illness because she could not bear to look at it then. The brass key belonged to the western gate. Today, while reaching for wedding thread, she had brushed the bundle by accident, or perhaps not by accident at all. She had taken it out because for the past 3 nights she had dreamed of pale tiles holding moonlight as if it were water. Dreams did not command her, she added, but they sometimes suggested where one's attention was overdue. Zaina ran a finger above the embroidered basins without touching them. Silver thread marked a line from the town's western well to the court, then from the court onward to a fork where one branch climbed toward plaster cliffs and another sank towards salt flats. In the margin, Sabiha had once stitched tiny words so fine that Zaina had to squint. Open the side channel at first dusk. Hang blue cloth where heaters slept. Leave one basin empty for the sky. They spread the map on the floor after the evening meal. Eunice came back smelling pleasantly of reed and market dust, and Basma brought tea with sage leaves in it. And Kareem immediately wanted the key for a game until everyone said no at once. Sabiha told them what she remembered. She spoke of a courtyard wall washed with white lime and painted near the entrance with a crescent and a bowl. She spoke of tamarisk shadows combing the ground. She spoke of travellers unrolling bedding so quietly that even the camels seemed to kneel with relief. Basma listened with both hands around her cup. She was practical, and because she was practical, her tenderness often arrived disguised as logistics. If the court still stood, she said, its platforms would need sweeping, its jars would need replacing, and its screens would have cracked long ago. Eunice asked about the roof beams. Sabiha thought the archways were still sound. The basins mattered more. If water could be coaxed back, people would return. Kareem wanted to know if fish had ever lived there. No, said Sabiha, only moonlight. After that, everyone became quiet in a pleasant way, the sort of quiet that means a household is beginning to imagine itself into a task. Finally, Eunice said he could spare 2 new reed mats and repair any door hinge worth saving. Basma said she could mix dried mint and rose leaves for pillow sachets, because sleeping travellers deserved gentle fragrances if the place reopened. Kareem promised to carry pebbles, though no one had asked him to. Zaina said nothing for a moment because her chest felt full. Then she asked if she might go with Sabiha when she visited the court. Sabiha looked at her over the tea steam with great steadiness and answered, "I had already assumed you would." They did not leave the next morning. because Sabiha believed in beginning things after proper noticing rather than after excitement. Instead, they prepared. Zaina spent the day helping Basma wash 2 lengths of blue cotton that could be cut into screen ties. Eunice selected simple tools: a small hammer, a coil of rope, a wedge for lifting stone lids, and a bundle of pegs shaved from tamarisk wood. Sabiha sorted the household keys until only the long brass one remained beside her cushion. Then she opened a cupboard and brought out 4 glazed cups, pale cream with rims the colour of evening apricots. These, she said, once belonged to the court. She had carried them home in a shawl many years ago when the last jar cracked, and everyone feared the remaining cups would be lost. Zaina washed them carefully in scented water and set them to dry upside down. Later she climbed to the roof to shake out a blanket that smelled of sun and old cotton. From there she could see the western road beyond the gate, pale and patient between low rises. Zaina wondered how many sleeping places lay across the sand at that very moment. Marker niches, bell houses, chalk shelters, palm courtyards, ridge caves, mud-walled inns, and simple patches of ground made hospitable by a lantern and a jar. She tried to imagine each one taking a quiet breath before dusk. At dawn on the following day, she and Sabiha set out together. They did not travel alone. Peaceful tasks in Ramallah rarely remained solitary for long. Eunice walked with them as far as the western well, leading a patient grey donkey loaded with rolled mats, folded screens, an empty water jar padded in straw, and a basket containing bread. Goat cheese wrapped in leaves, dates, a jar of mint seeds, soap, lamp oil, and the 4 apricot-rimmed cups. Karim trotted beside them, carrying nothing important, and speaking as if words were birds that would perish if not released immediately. Basma accompanied the party to the gate with a packet of dried rose petals and mint, plus a small tin of perfumed salve in case old wood splintered hands. Just inside the gate they met old Faraj, who was 68, broad-shouldered and so reliable that people referred to him as though he were a bridge. Faraj drove a mule cart for those who had more care than strength, and when he learned their errand he declared that he was going west anyway to deliver clay jars to a shepherd camp. He offered space on the cart for the heaviest things. Sabiha accepted with gratitude but not surprise, as though the road had merely arranged itself in a sensible pattern. So the party grew. They passed through the gate in the pink hour before sunrise, when even dust seemed rosy, and the air touched the skin like cool cloth fresh from shade. The road west of Ramallah was different from the east road of Markers, and different from the southern route of Towers, though news of both travelled through it as calmly as tea scent through a room. Here the land opened in layers, low dunes banded with silver grasses, gravel fans flecked with white stone, shallow hollows where tamarisk and wormwood gathered, and occasional shelves of pale rock worn smooth by wind older than any map. Zaina walked beside Sabiha and tried not to step too far ahead. Sabiha favoured a measured pace that made conversation possible and observation inevitable, so she pointed out an old line of paving half buried near the track, once used when heavy wagons carried glazed pottery from the western kilns. She showed Zaina how the wind arranged dune ripples differently on either side of a shrub, making a small lesson in direction every few steps. Where the road bent around a rise, they met a family from a goat camp leading pack animals laden with wool sacks. The grandmother of that family recognised Sabiha from long ago, and the 2 old women stood together with their palms on each other's shoulders, smiling at the unhurried miracle of continuation. When they heard the destination, the grandmother said she remembered drinking tamarind water in the Court of Sleeping Water as a new bride. Her grandson, a boy carrying a flute of reed, asked whether the basin still sang at night. Then Sabiha answered that if they did not, perhaps they only needed cleaning. Everyone seemed pleased by this possibility. Before the 2 families parted, Basma's rosemint packet was opened and shared in the breeze, so that both groups smelled for a moment like a garden hidden inside linen. By the time the sun lifted clear, they had reached the tamarisk belt that marked the old turnoff. The main road continued west toward distant cliffs, but a narrower track curved south of a grove, where the shade lay in long grey-green ribbons. The entrance was nearly invisible beneath drifting sand, and had Zaina been alone she might have passed it. Yet the indigo map seemed to recognise the land. Sabiha paused at the grove's edge, unfolded the cloth, and aligned one silver-stitched star with the morning light. Then she turned slightly and pointed with certainty. There. Faraj guided the mule cart between tamarisk trunks. Branch tips brushed Zaina's sleeves, releasing a resin scent dry and clean at once. Beyond the grove, the ground dipped, and the court of sleeping water revealed itself gradually. Not as ruin, exactly, but as patience. One corner wall stood white beneath dust. The gate arch remained intact, though the wooden door leaned inward on one hinge like a man dozing. Within, she glimpsed raised platforms along two sides, shallow basins sunk in the centre, and a line of arches whose screens had long since unravelled. Sand lay everywhere, but not thickly enough to erase intention. The place felt paused rather than lost. Zaina stopped at the threshold without meaning to. All at once she understood why Sabia had spoken so carefully. A sleeping place held a different kind of memory from a market or a house. Markets remembered voices. Houses remembered hands. This courtyard remembered the instant after strangers had decided they were safe enough to rest. Sabia did not step inside immediately. She touched the brass key to the door plank first, then kissed 2 fingers and pressed them to the arch. Zaina copied her without being told. Faraj removed his cap. Even Karim, who had chattered almost without interruption since dawn, grew respectfully quiet. Yunus tested the leaning door and laughed softly when the old hinge objected in a rusty but lively voice. The sound pleased everyone more than silence would have done. It meant the place was not offended by waking. Together they entered. The courtyard floor had once been paved in pale clay tiles set around 7 narrow basins like petals around a flower. Now the tiles showed only in patches. Sand filled the channels between them. A thin drift had gathered against the sleeping platforms, which were low stone ledges wide enough for bedding and pillows. The arches along the west wall still held fragments of reed lattice tied with faded blue strips. One brass hook dangled from a beam with a shred of cloth attached, and this little survival moved Sabia more than Zaina expected. She stood beneath it, smiling not sadly but deeply, like someone greeting a friend who had aged with honour. In one corner lay a broken jar stand of carved stone. In another rose a date palm no taller than Yunus's shoulder, alive but stunted, its leaves the colour of old olive skins. The basins themselves were dry, yet when Zaina knelt beside the nearest one she found its plaster smooth, not cracked. At the deepest point a coolness remained. She touched it with 2 fingers and felt something like a held breath. Work began in the mildest and most natural way, with sweeping. Faraj unloaded the tools and jars. Yunus propped the gate door while Sabia walked the perimeter slowly, measuring with her eyes what time had asked of the place. Zaina took up a palm broom and started on the nearest platform. The sand there was fine as sifted flour. Beneath it emerged lime-washed stone, still pale under the dust. Karim discovered that if he swept too enthusiastically, he created little storms that settled on what had just been cleaned. So he was assigned to collecting driftwood and twig litter from the corners, a task he accepted after a solemn warning from Basma, who had not come but whose practical spirit seemed entirely present. Sabiha moved from basin to basin, pressing the plaster with her thumb. At the 4th basin she nodded to herself. The side channel might still be clear below the drift. That mattered, though Zaina did not yet know how much. By mid-morning the outlines of the courtyard shone through. The central tiles proved to be star-shaped, not plain squares, and each basin had a lip edged with tiny blue flecks. Zaina found a fallen shell button under one platform and held it up. Sabia said perhaps it had escaped from a traveller's robe 30 years ago, or 50. Either way, the button had waited here with exemplary manners. When the heat thickened, they rested beneath the arches and ate bread with cheese and sliced cucumber sprinkled with salt. Faraj poured water into one of the old cups, admired the glaze, and said cups that handsome made plain water taste better, because they reminded a person to pay attention. Sabia agreed. After eating, while the donkey cropped dry tufts near the grove, Zaina followed her aunt to the rear wall where the indigo map suggested a hidden line. At first all she saw was whitewash, pitted by weather. Then Sabia knelt and brushed away a seam of dust with her fingertips. A narrow stone cover lay flush to the wall, almost invisible. With Yunus's wedge they lifted it. Cool air rose. Below ran a channel scarcely wider than a hand, half choked with compacted sand and tamarisk leaves, descending gently toward the basins. The seep, Sabiha explained, did not spring openly. Farther upslope, hidden by rock and root, underground moisture collected in a small chamber and fed this channel if it was kept clear. Because the water came slowly, the basins were never deep. They were not made for bathing or display. They were made for rinsing dust, cooling ankles, and teaching tired people that relief need not arrive in abundance to be real. Zaina loved this at once. The rest of that day passed in quiet industry. Yunus repaired the gate hinge with a new pin shaved from tamarisk wood and strengthened with wire. He happened, like all sensible basket makers, to carry in a wrap at his belt. Faraj set the new water jar on a temporary stand of bricks and pledged to bring a proper carved base on his next trip. Karim lined up pretty pebbles on the platform edge until Sabiha suggested they would be more useful marking where loose tiles needed setting, and then he became a very serious marker of tiles indeed. Zaina and Sabiha knelt side by side, clearing the side channel a handful at a time. The work required patience more than force. They loosened sand, lifted twigs, drew out roots, and carried away old silt in a shallow tray. When Zaina grew too eager and pushed clumsily, Sabiha reminded her that a channel closed slowly and must be opened slowly as well, because haste was only another form of not listening. By late afternoon, a dark line of moisture appeared at the lowest bend. Not flowing, not yet, but visible. Zaina stared as if the earth had whispered her name. Sabiha only smiled and told her to stop staring and fetch the blue cloth, because heat had slept in the arches long enough. They hung the cloth strips from the reed lattice remains, tying them where the old knot still showed. Yunus helped fix 3 fresh screens, leaving spaces between them so that air could move. The result transformed the west side at once. The blue length shifted gently in the breeze and cast a quiet, cool light over the platforms, as if a pocket of evening had arrived before sunset. Sabiha sprinkled water on the floor beneath the arches. The scent of wet dust rose, that beloved scent so brief and astonishing that people in dry lands often fell silent to honour it. Zana stood in the middle of the courtyard and turned slowly. The place still needed much. More sweeping, more mending, proper pillows, perhaps a shelf for cups, perhaps mint in the corner troughs if they could be cleared. Yet it no longer felt merely remembered. It had begun, unmistakably, to return. Before leaving for the day, Sabiha placed one of the apricot-rimmed cups upside down beside the central basin, and another on the platform nearest the gate. She said a place woke more easily when offered signs that its customs were expected again. Zaina found this so convincing that she nearly bowed to the cups. Because Sabiha was wise, they did not try to finish everything in a single visit. They returned to Rimala at sunset, with dust on their hems and satisfaction in their bones. Basma met them in the courtyard with lentil stew and cool melon slices, and even Karim, exhausted by collecting useful sticks, ate in near silence. After supper, Zaina carried bedding to the roof but did not sleep at once. Instead, she watched Sabiha unfold the indigo map under the moon. The silver thread brightened in a way it had not done by day. Roads gleamed faintly. The 7 basins looked almost wet. Then something stranger happened, though not frighteningly strange. At the edge of the embroidered courtyard, a line of tiny stitches that Zaina had taken for decoration shone more clearly than the rest. Sabiha bent close. "Ah," she murmured, "there you are." The stitched line was not a border after all, but a note marking a lower cistern chamber reached from the outer wall behind the second tamarisk. The moon had revealed what daylight concealed. Zaina asked if the cloth was magical. Sabiha considered. She said every good map was a little magical because attention, once fixed long enough in thread or ink, became a guide even when the maker had gone to sleep. Then she admitted that this particular cloth had also been stitched with a strand of old pilgrimage silk given to her sister by a star reader, so perhaps the moon took a special interest in it. Zaina accepted this happily. In Rimala, magic that behaved politely and helped with useful tasks was considered the best sort. 2 days later, they returned with greater purpose. Basma sent pillows stuffed with carded cotton and scented with mint and rose. Yunus added 2 low shelves, a hook bar for lanterns, and a repaired door latch. Faraj brought the promised carved stand for the water jar, its sides cut with simple wave patterns. He also brought a bundle of small clay bowls from a potter cousin, who had heard of the restoration and wished to contribute. With them came little Hana, Faraj's niece, who was 9, shy in the face, and fierce in the hands. She loved polishing surfaces and asked if she might polish the basin rims. Sabiha welcomed her at once. The road, she said, belonged to anyone willing to improve it gently. This second visit took on the atmosphere of a working visit and a picnic at once. The adults mended, carried and measured. The children swept, polished, sorted and fetched. Zaina knelt with Hana and rubbed the basin edges using soft cloth and chalk powder until the blue flecks in the plaster shone, like tiny bits of sky caught under skin. Karim, promoted from stick collection to official pebble washer, rinsed smooth white stones in a bowl and arranged them around the mint troughs. Sabiha oversaw everything while never appearing to command. She simply seemed to understand what each pair of hands would most enjoy doing, and so the day flowed with almost no friction. From time to time she hummed an old road song under her breath, a tune with more air than melody in it, and the courtyard began to feel inhabited by time as well as people. In the outer wall behind the second tamarisk they found the lower cistern chamber exactly where the moonlit stitches had promised. Its lid was half buried and crusted with salt. Once lifted, it revealed a small stone reservoir still cool despite neglect, fed by slow seepage from the same hidden source as the basins. There was little water in it, but enough to glimmer. Zaina peered down and felt wonder settle through her as softly as flour through a sieve. They cleaned the chamber carefully, skimming leaves, lifting old silt, and checking the narrow overflow channel that led inward. Sabiha explained that the courtyard had been designed for moderation. The cistern stored more than the basins needed in a single evening. The excess moved slowly through the side channel, filling one basin after another with measured fairness. Leave one basin empty for the sky, the stitched note had said, because a resting place should offer reflection as well as use. Eunice tested the stonework and said it remained sound, praise from him being especially valuable because baskets had made him respectful of joins. By late afternoon, the first basin held a silver finger's width of water. No one spoke when they saw it. Even Karim merely crouched and stared, his usual questions softened into awe. The surface trembled at the lightest breeze, showing a broken little moon, although the moon had not yet risen. Zaina dipped 2 fingers, touched the water to her wrists, and felt a coolness so complete that for a moment the whole of summer seemed kind. During the third visit, which took place under a half-moon, they decided to remain through evening so they could observe the court at the hour for which it had been intended. Basma packed egg pastries glazed with cumin and 2 small melons nestled in straw. Faraj lit a lantern before sunset and hung it from the restored hook beneath the arch. Its glow fell on the blue cloth and turned the space almost aquatic. Zaina spread the new reed mats on the cleanest platforms and placed a pillow at the head of each. Hana set the clay bowls in a row on the shelf. Karim, having learned restraint through repeated instruction, placed only 3 sprigs of mint in each bowl rather than a whole fistful. Sabiha moved from basin to basin with a folded rag, drying any grain of sand that had blown in and leaving the 5th basin empty for the sky exactly as the map prescribed. When the moon finally cleared the grove, its light entered through the arches and touched the empty basin first. There the reflection pulled so perfectly that Zaina felt she was looking down into a quiet well of stars. Water slept in the other basins, each one narrow and clear. A breeze passed. The blue strips stirred. Somewhere in the tamarisk a night bird clicked once. Sabiha seated herself on the platform nearest the gate, not like a queen or even a hostess, but like a person resuming a long, interrupted sentence. Before midnight the court received its first guests, though not many. A potter from the western kilns came leading a donkey laden with nested jars cushioned in straw rope. He had heard from the gate widow that the court might be open, and had hoped to test the rumour. With him travelled his sister and her little daughter, all 3 grey with road dust and grateful in the unshowy way that does not waste energy on surprise. They entered softly, as if afraid to disturb the place, but Sabiha rose and welcomed them by name because roads had a habit of turning strangers into acquaintances after 3 encounters and kin after 7. The potter's sister knelt beside the basin to rinse her wrists and smiled, as though she had been offered a memory from youth. The daughter, who looked no older than 6, lay on a mat after eating dates, and was asleep almost before the lantern flame steadied. and Zaina brought cups of water without spilling. She liked the feeling of being useful inside a quiet. Later, when the guests settled fully, the potter remarked that the court smelled exactly as he remembered such places should smell. Wet clay, mint leaf, lamp oil and woven reed, warmed by day, then cooled by night. Zaina stored the sentence inside herself because it seemed important that rightness had a fragrance. They kept watch only a little while longer. Sabiha did not believe in turning hospitality into performance by hovering over those who needed rest. She and Zaina lay on the remaining platform listening to the mild sounds of sleeping travellers. A child's sigh, a donkey's shifting hoof, water touching plaster when wind crossed the basins. The roofless square above them held a moon so steady it seemed stitched in place. Zaina whispered that the court felt as though it had been waiting for them kindly. Sabiha answered that many places waited kindly. People simply passed them too quickly to notice. After a pause, she added that roads wore out in more ways than by wind. A road also wore thin when no one imagined the needs of the tired. The court mattered because it reminded travellers that arrival could be gentle. Zaina turned those words over until sleep found her. Near dawn, she woke once and thought she heard a faint singing. Not a voice exactly, but something like several glass threads touching. The sound came from the empty basin. When she raised herself on one elbow, she saw only moonlight loosening into morning, yet the basin's reflection trembled as though the sky had whispered into it. After that night, Zaina visited the court so often that the western path began to feel like an extension of her own street. Some days she went with Sabiha, some days with Basma or Hana, or a pair of neighbouring cousins carrying fresh bread. Once Eunice sent her with a new basket full of rolled cloths, and instructions to notice whether a sandal shelf might fit beside the gate. Another time, the widow at the fennel stall entrusted her with a bundle of fragrant leaves for steeping in drinking water. The work never ended, which pleased rather than discouraged her. Sleeping places, she learned, were not restored once. They were restored again each morning by refilling jars, shaking mats, trimming wicks, sweeping corners, and observing what needed kindness next. She learned to brush sand away from basin edges without clouding the water. She learned to tie blue cloth so it fluttered instead of snarled. She learned which platform kept the coolest shade by late afternoon, and which one a grandmother with stiff knees would prefer because it was nearest the gate. Sometimes she sat with Sabiha by the outer wall and copied bits of the indigo map onto scraps of linen, practicing the small neat symbols for jars, steps, sleeping ledges, and tamarisk. Her stitches were crooked at first. Sabiha said crookedness in honest practice was nothing to fear. One evening a pair of travellers arrived from the East Road and mentioned over tea a little lamp niche newly restored near an old line of markers beyond Tazef. Another week brought a salt merchant from the south who had rested at a bell house near the last palm and said the keeper's bell now sounded clearer than a copper bowl struck at dawn. Zaina thrilled quietly at these reports. The desert world was larger than she could walk in a month, perhaps larger than she could walk in a lifetime, yet it seemed threaded together by modest acts of care. A lamp relit, a strap replaced, a basin swept, a jar covered against pollen. She told Sabiha that the roads felt like one long house with many rooms. Sabiha considered and answered that this was nearly true, except that houses belong to families, and roads belong to everyone willing to behave like family for a while. This distinction seemed worth remembering, and seemed worth. That night Zaina added a tiny symbol to her practice cloth for places where one is kindly received, though the symbol was only a little open circle, and would mean nothing to another person without explanation. As the court grew more welcoming, Sabiha decided it needed one more element before it could be considered truly awake, a place for music so soft that it would not disturb sleepers, only keep company with the air. She remembered that long ago there had been hanging spoons or shells somewhere near the rear arch, but no one had found them. So on a mild afternoon she and Zaina examined the beams closely. At the third beam they discovered 3 tiny drill holes aligned in a row, and a 4th hidden beneath whitewash. That was enough. Faraj's potter cousin contributed a handful of broken glaze shards the colour of moonlit sea glass. Then Ahena donated shell buttons from an aunt's mending basket. Eunice carved a smooth crosspiece from tamarisk. Zaina and Sabiha threaded the pieces onto fine cord at the courtyard platform while drinking tea with cardamom. They worked slowly, choosing the order by sound rather than shape. Glass-touched Shell. Shell answered with the faintest click. When at last they hung the finished strings beneath the arch where the evening breeze entered, the first whisper of wind made a tone so delicate that Kareem frowned and asked if it had happened at all. Then the breeze returned and the little chimes spoke together. Not a melody, only a bright murmur like distant cups being set down with care. Sabiha closed her eyes. "There," she said. "Now the air itself knows it is welcome. The gentlest magic of all declared itself during the month's first full moon." By then, the court had been receiving guests for several weeks. The basins filled reliably each evening. The date palm had sent up 2 new fronds. The shell and glass chimes spoke whenever the west breeze wandered through. Yet Sabiha still checked every corner with the attentiveness of a person who understood that gratitude must be practical. On the night of the full moon, 3 camel families arrived from the western cliffs and spread their bedding on the platforms after sharing a meal of rice with raisins and carrots from their lidded pot. One of the older women admired the empty basin reserved for the sky, and said the custom was beautiful. After everyone had settled, Zaina carried the used cups to the jar stand and returned across the tiles just as the moon rose high enough to strike the basin line straight on. To her surprise, the reflected moonlight did not remain in the 5th basin alone. It seemed to travel slow and clear along the damp channel lips from basin to basin, as though someone were drawing silver with an invisible brush. Not bright, not theatrical, simply undeniable. The first basin took it, then the second, until each held a pale ribbon. The sleeping travellers did not stir. Sabiha, however, saw it too. She placed a hand lightly on Zaina's shoulder. "The court remembers moon service," she whispered. That was all. But for the rest of the night, Zaina felt that the place was not merely functioning. It was pleased. She spoke of the silver channels to no one beyond Hana and Kareem, and even then only briefly. Sabiha preferred to describe the basins as especially beautiful under a full moon, which was true enough. Zaina agreed, because marvels that attracted more attention than care rarely stayed graceful. A few evenings later, a shy cat with a sandy stripe across its nose curled beneath the shelf, as if it had always lived there. Hannah named it Sesame, and Sesame stayed to keep watch there. Near the end of the month, Sabiha announced that the court would host a proper moon rest. Not a festival with drums and noise, but an evening of readiness for the season's large westbound caravan. This caravan, carrying wool, tea bricks, indigo bundles, paper and letters, usually passed Ramallah just after the harvest moon. Many travellers slept in town, but some preferred the cooler quiet outside the gate. If the court of sleeping water was to complete its return, it should receive them with full dignity. Preparations began at once. Basma and the baker's wife planned trays of date biscuits flavoured with orange peel. Yunus measured for 2 additional shelves and a removable awning strip in case the breeze turned sharp after midnight. Faraj promised extra jars. The widow at the fennel stall contributed a basket of her best bunches to steep in water. Children from the lane were assigned manageable jobs: polishing cups, washing pebbles, folding blankets, carrying reeds for fresh mats. Zaina received the task she loved most and feared slightly, arranging the sleeping platform so that elders, families with small children, lone women and late arrivals would each find a natural place. Sabiha said this required both good sense and tenderness, and Zaina felt taller just hearing it. For 3 days she considered platforms the way other children considered sweets. She visited at morning, noon and dusk, noting where shade lingered longest, where the breeze turned, where a child might sleep undisturbed by feet at the gate, where an elder might sit with an easy rise to prayer or tea. She folded blankets, tested pillows, and moved lantern hooks until the court seemed balanced in her mind like a woven pattern. On her practice cloth she stitched a tiny plan of the arrangement in pale thread. Sabiha watched without interfering until the second evening, when she asked one question only. Where will the truly tired choose to lie if they are too weary to decide? Zaina understood at once and moved the softest mat to the nearest platform with the clearest path from the gate. Roads, she thought, were full of such questions. Not what is impressive, but what is merciful when someone can barely think. This realization felt more valuable than any secret of moonlight. The caravan arrived on a sky the colour of figs. Word came ahead by a boy on a lean donkey, who who stopped at the western gate long enough to drink, grin, and say that the lead camels were only an hour away. Ramallah entered its usual graceful commotion. Market awnings were tightened. Tea boiled in larger kettles. Porters adjusted their belts. Zaina and Sabiha, with Hana and Karim and Faraj's help, made one final journey to the court. They swept once more, though there was almost no dust. They filled the main jar and the secondary jar. They placed clay bowls of mint leaves near the platforms. Basma's date biscuits were arranged in covered trays. The lanterns were trimmed and hung. Sesame the cat inspected everything from beneath the shelf and found it satisfactory. Just before sunset, Sabiha unlocked the gate with the old brass key, though the latch no longer required such ceremony. She said that when a place had slept a long while, one should honour the instruments that first remembered it. Then she handed the key to Zaina. Not forever, she said, only for tonight. Zaina held it with both hands. The metal was warm from Sabiha's palm and heavier than it appeared. She slipped the cord over her wrist and felt, not burdened, but entrusted. The first arrivals came in small groups, a bookseller and her nephew, 3 sisters escorting a grandmother whose ankles preferred cool plaster to the town stairs, a family with baskets of pears wrapped in leaves, 2 brothers leading a docile camel so laden with blue cloth that it resembled a moving patch of twilight, and Zaina welcomed them as she had seen Sabiha do, not loudly, not fussily, but with clarity. The nearest platform is shaded longest. Cups are on the shelf. If you wish, the 5th basin is left empty for the sky. People seemed to understand from her tone how to enter. They rinsed hands, loosened sandals, spread bedding, sighed, and became softer around the face. As dusk deepened, the larger caravan finally turned from the main road, drawn perhaps by word of the court or perhaps by the lantern glow under blue cloth. It absorbed arrival the way good wool absorbs warmth. Zaina moved among the guests carrying cups, adjusting pillows, showing children where to wash their feet without splashing the dry tiles. Among the travellers was an old paper merchant from the east who spoke of marker stones listening at dawn. Another was a young mule driver from the south, who said bell houses kept better company than many towns. Neither tale was told loudly, yet both settled into the evening as naturally as lamp smoke. Zaina loved the sense that the court was joining a conversation already underway across the whole desert world. A woman from a date caravan brought news of a restored niche, where a brass lamp now guided late walkers. A potter bound for the cliffs reported that at the house of the last palm someone had hung shell chimes in the stairwind, which made Sabiha lift her brows with amused approval, as though roads enjoyed borrowing good ideas from one another. No names were exchanged with importance. None were needed. It was enough that kindness travelled. As night thickened, the shell and glass chimes under the arch answered the breeze and mingled with camel breaths, basin water, and the rustle of bedding. The soundscape was so mild, so completely without urgency, that Zaina felt her own thoughts spread out and rest like folded blankets. Later, after the children of the caravan had fallen asleep in improbable positions and the elders sat with teacups warming their fingers, Sabiha asked Zaina to bring the indigo map. She spread it on the platform between them for those nearest to admire. Moonlight and lantern light met on the threads. Roads gleamed. Resting places shone as tiny knots. Several travellers leaned in, not greedily, but with the reverent curiosity maps deserve. An old woman from the cliff road touched a stitched basin and said she had slept there as a bride. A man with hennaed hands recognised the symbol for a chalkridge shelter, where his uncle once traded apricots for wool. Someone asked who had embroidered such a cloth. Sabiha answered, "My sister and I began it, and now the child is learning." She did not point at Zaina dramatically. She simply said the words into the warm night, and because of that they entered Zaina more deeply. Learning, not finished, not titled, not praised beyond usefulness. Learning was enough. She placed her hand near the stitched courtyard and felt the brass key against her wrist like a second heartbeat. At moonrise the gentle marvel returned, more clearly than before. The 5th basin, empty as always, caught the moon first. Then the pale sheen travelled through the damp lips of the channels, touching each basin in turn until all 7 held narrow paths of silver. This time several wakeful travellers noticed. No one exclaimed. Perhaps the road had trained them better than that. A grandmother smiled into her tea. The bookseller bowed her head as though acknowledging a host. The old paper merchant murmured that some places remembered their best customs more faithfully than people did. Sabiha merely inclined her head toward the water, and Zaina understood again why she guarded such things from bragging. Wonder needed room to breathe, or it became entertainment and lost its manners. The silver remained only a few moments before thinning back into ordinary water, yet the court seemed afterward even more settled, as if the moon had signed the guest book and gone on. When the hour grew late, Zaina finally lay down on the small mat she'd kept near the gate for herself. She could see 3 basins, full 1 lantern, the lower edge of the blue cloth, and above them all a square of stars. She did not fall asleep immediately because her heart was full in the gentlest possible way. Across the court a child muttered in sleep and was soothed by a mother's hand. Outside in the grove a camel's bell gave 1 muted note. The chimes under the arch answered the breeze with their glass shell murmur. The mint bowls scented the air. Somewhere beyond the walls the caravan world continued. Marker roads, bell houses, white shelters, mud inns, ridge paths, market gates. Yet here, in this little whitewashed court with 7 basins and 1 empty place for the sky, the whole wide journey seemed to gather itself into rest. Zaina thought then that perhaps the long journey across the sand was not only the distance between towns, perhaps it was also the movement from weariness into welcome, repeated over and over until even strangers felt the world had been expecting them kindly. She woke before dawn to the sound of cups being lifted. The eastern rim of the sky was pale and several older travellers were already seated quietly, enjoying the coldest moment of the day. Zaina rose, tied back her hair, and helped pour water with the solemn happiness of someone stepping into a role that suited her shape. Sabiha emerged from her blanket looking exactly as though she had merely blinked rather than slept. Together they walked the court's perimeter, checking mats, gathering bowls, writing a pillow, praising a child who had left her sandals neatly paired by the shelf. The caravan would depart soon, and departures had their own tenderness. Travellers folded bedding, ears shook out cloaks, thanked the hosts, and moved toward the gate in the grey-blue hour when goodbyes feel both temporary and complete. Several paused to touch the water in the first basin one last time. The bookseller pressed a scrap of smooth paper into Zaina's hand on which she had written, in careful script, "A place that lets strangers sleep becomes part of their prayer." The old paper merchant gifted Sabiha a small packet of lampblack, and said maps should never run out of night. The grandmother from the cliff road tucked a tiny silver bead into Karim's palm for his excellent pebble washing. Then the camels rose, the bells thudded softly, and the court began releasing its guests back into distance. After the last of them had gone and the grove settled, Zaina expected Sabiha to sit down in weariness. Instead, the old woman asked for the broom. Not because the court looked untidy, but because hospitality concluded with restoration. They swept the faint tracks, covered the cups, checked the channel, and left the 5th basin empty again. Only after these tasks did Sabiha sit beneath the arch. Zaina joined her. Morning light entered clear and colourless. The blue cloth now looked almost grey. Birds argued mildly in the tamarisk. Sabiha asked how the arrangement of platforms had worked. Zaina answered honestly, 1 mat should have been thicker for the grandmother's knees. The children had needed 1 extra blanket near midnight. The pears had perfumed the north platform pleasantly. The gate path had been clear enough even for the half asleep. Sabiha nodded as if hearing an account from a fellow keeper rather than a child. Then she removed the brass key from Zaina's wrist and turned it in her own hands. For a moment Zaina felt a small ache, but before the feeling could settle, Sabiha looped the cord back over Zaina's palm and closed her fingers around it. "Keep it for this season," she said. "I'm old enough to know when a hand has learned the weight of a thing." Zaina did not answer at once because joy, when pure, sometimes arrives too large for immediate speech. She lowered her head over the key. It smelled faintly of metal, oil, and Sabiha's skin. At last she said she would keep it carefully. Sabiha replied that careful was good, but devoted was better. A key was not for possessing. It was for opening at the proper hour, locking at the proper hour, and remembering which places deserved both. Then she leaned back against the whitewashed wall and closed her eyes in contentment. Zaina sat beside her with the key warm in her hand and watched light slide into the empty basin reserved for the sky. The basin held only morning now, but morning was enough. She thought of the map cloth, the moonlit stitches, the hidden cistern, the shell chimes, the sleeping potter's child, the caravan elders rinsing their wrists, the silver travelling along the channels. She thought of Rhodes as a long house with many rooms. Most of all, she thought of the way Sabiha had said learning. The word stayed with her like a lamp that did not glare. On the last warm night before the autumn, cool settled properly over Imola, Zaina and Sabiha went to the court alone. No guests had yet arrived. The basins were full. The fifth basin reflected an early star. As Zaina unlocked the gate and they entered carrying only tea, dates, a folded shawl, and the indigo map. Under the arch they spread the cloth and compared thread to reality, stitched basin to basin, stitched palm to living palm, stitched gate to repaired gate. The map was no longer only memory. It had become instruction fulfilled and future promise at once. Sabiha rested one hand on the cloth and the other on the platform beside her. She told Zaina that someday the court would change again. Screens would fray, plaster would dull, another child might inherit the key. Such changes were not losses if attention continued. Rhodes did not ask for forever, only for the next faithful season. Zaina listened until the words sank all the way down. Then she poured tea into the apricot-rimmed cups. They drank slowly while the shell chimes whispered and the star in the empty basin brightened. At last, with no need for more speech, they sat side by side as evening became night, and the western road beyond the grove carried its quiet travellers onward through the sand. If this final night on the desert road has rested gently with you, you can softly subscribe, return whenever you need a calmer world, and meet these quiet roads again where moonlight, kindness, and sleep travel together across the sand. Our fourth story begins with the quiet patience of the desert. The desert did not announce itself with grandeur. It revealed itself slowly, through heat that lingered in stone, through wind that whispered instead of roared, through roads that seemed to remember every traveller who had passed before. Along one such road stood a quiet town named Safra, where evenings softened into amber light and mornings began with the scent of bread and dust. Rafi had grown up in this quiet rhythm. He was 12, observant and patient in a way that made older people trust him without knowing why. While others spoke quickly, Rafi watched. He noticed how shadows shifted along walls, how water cooled faster in certain jars, how travellers entered a town not just with their feet but with their eyes. Across from his home lived Halima, just an old woman known simply as the Keeper of Evening. She carried herself with a calm authority, as if she had spent her life arranging small things in their proper places. Lamps, people, silence. She understood all three. One evening, as the sky turned the colour of steeped tea, Halima opened an old chest and revealed a glass chimney the colour of warm amber. It caught the light in a way that felt deliberate, almost alive. "This," she said, "belonged to the seventh lantern." Rafi leaned closer. "Where is it now?" Halima looked toward the northern road. "Waiting." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, they set out together. The journey was quiet. The road stretched pale beneath their feet, and the air held the last cool breath of night. As they walked, Halima spoke of the House of Seven Lanterns, a resting place once known across the desert, where travellers could find water, shade, and something rarer, ease. When they finally saw it, the house stood as if paused in time. Dust covered its walls and silence filled its yard, but it had not collapsed. It had simply waited. They entered through a stubborn gate. Inside, the space revealed itself. Stone ledges, a deep well, and 7 niches carved into the wall. 5 lanterns still hung there, dulled but intact. Rafi moved slowly, taking everything in. "Can it be restored?" he asked. Halima smiled faintly. It never forgot how. They began with the simplest task, sweeping. Dust lifted into the air and settled again, as if reluctant to leave. Then they turned to the well. Rafi held his breath as the bucket descended. When it returned, the water shimmered. "It's alive," he said. Halima nodded. "So is the house." As evening approached, they prepared one lantern. Raffi lit it carefully. The flame steadied and something changed. The walls softened. The silence shifted. The house was no longer empty. They returned to Safra with news. And as news does in quiet places, it spread not with noise, but with certainty. People began to help. A rope here, a cushion there, tools, oil, food, each offering small but together enough. Days later they returned with everything needed. Work unfolded naturally. Repairs, cleaning, arranging. No one rushed. The house guided them. At dusk they lit 3 lanterns, and that night travellers came. A shepherd family entered first, hesitant at the gate. Then others followed. Word had already begun to move. Raffi watched as Halima welcomed them, not with grand gestures but with quiet precision. Water first, then rest. That night, Raffi stayed. Under the lantern light, Halima showed him the sequence, how each lamp was meant to serve a moment. Arrival, settling, rest, sleep. "This is not lighting," she said softly. "This is care." Weeks passed. The house found its rhythm again. Travellers came and went. The well remained generous. The lanterns were lit each evening in order, and Raffi changed. He learned how to read flame, how to listen to silence, how to notice what others needed before they spoke. One evening, the final lantern, the amber one, was placed above the gate. Raffi lit it. The glow spread like warmth through the stone. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. The house was complete. Later that night, Raffi stood by the well and looked up. The lanterns reflected the stars. Each one held a piece of the sky. He turned to Halima. "How does it do that?" She answered simply, "It remembers." Seasons passed. The house endured. It did not become crowded. It became trusted. And Raffi, standing beneath the amber light, understood something he had not known before. The journey across the desert was not made easier by distance. It was made gentler by what waited at the end of the day. The desert did not announce itself with grandeur. It revealed itself slowly, through heat that lingered in stone, through wind that whispered instead of roared, through roads that seemed to remember every traveller who had passed before. Along one such road stood a quiet town named Safra, where evenings softened into amber light, and mornings began with the scent of bread and dust. Raffi had grown up in this quiet rhythm. He was 12, observant and patient in a way that made older people trust him without knowing why. While others spoke quickly, Raffi watched. He noticed how shadows shifted along walls, how water cooled faster in certain jars, how travellers entered a town not just with their feet, but with their eyes. Across from his home lived Halima, an old woman known simply as the Keeper of Evening. She carried herself with a calm authority, as if she had spent her life arranging small things in their proper places. Lamps, people, silence. She understood all 3. One evening, as the sky turned the colour of steeped tea, Halima opened an old chest and revealed a glass chimney the colour of the warm amber. It caught the light in a way that felt deliberate, almost alive. "This," she said, "belonged to the 7th lantern?" Raffi leaned closer. "Where is it now?" Halima looked toward the northern road. "Waiting." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, they set out together. The journey was quiet. The road stretched pale beneath their feet, and the air held the last cool breath of night. As they walked, Halima spoke of the House of 7 Lanterns, a resting place once known across the desert, where travellers could find water, shade, and something rarer, ease. When they finally saw it, the house stood as if paused in time. Dust covered its walls and silence filled its yard, but it had not collapsed. It had simply waited. They entered through a stubborn gate. Inside, the space revealed itself, stone ledges, a deep well, and 7 niches carved into the wall. 5 lanterns still hung there, dulled but intact. Raffi moved slowly, taking everything in. "Can it be restored?" he asked. Halima smiled faintly. It never forgot how. They began with the simplest task, sweeping. Dust lifted into the air and settled again, as if reluctant to leave. Then they turned to the well. Raffi held his breath as the bucket descended. When it returned, the water shimmered. "It's alive," he said. Halima nodded. so is the house. As evening approached, they prepared one lantern. Raffi lit it carefully. The flame steadied, and something changed. The wall softened. The silence shifted. The house was no longer empty. They returned to Safra with news, and as news does in quiet places, it spread not with noise but with certainty. People began to help. A rope here, a cushion there, tools, oil, food, each offering small but together enough. Days later, they returned with everything needed. Work unfolded naturally. Repairs, cleaning, arranging, no one rushed. The house guided them. At dusk they lit 3 lanterns, and that night travellers came. A shepherd family entered first, hesitant at the gate. Then others followed. Word had already begun to move. Raffi watched as Halima welcomed them, not with grand gestures, but with quiet precision. Water first, then rest. That night Raffi stayed. Under the lantern light, Halima showed him the sequence, how each lamp was meant to serve a moment. Arrival, settling, rest, sleep. "This is not lighting," she said softly. "This is care." Weeks passed. The house found its rhythm again. Travellers came and went. The well remained generous. The lanterns were lit each evening in order. And Raffi changed. He learned how to read flame, how to listen to silence, or sex, how to notice what others needed before they spoke. One evening, the final lantern, the amber one, was placed above the gate. Raffi lit it. The glow spread like warmth through the stone. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. The house was complete. Later that night, Raffi stood by the well and looked up. The lanterns reflected the stars. Each one held a piece of the sky. He turned to Halima. "How does it do that?" She answered simply, "It remembers." Seasons passed. The house endured. It did not become crowded. It became trusted. And Raffi, standing beneath the amber light, understood something he had not known before. The journey across the desert was not made easier by distance. It was made gentler by what waited at the end of the day. The desert did not announce itself with grandeur. It revealed itself slowly, through heat that lingered in the stone, through wind that whispered instead of roared, through roads that seemed to remember every traveller who had passed before. Along one such road stood a quiet town named Safra, where evenings softened into amber light, and mornings began with the scent of bread and dust. Raffi had grown up in this quiet rhythm. He was 12, observant, and patient in a way that made older people trust him without knowing why. While others spoke quickly, Raffi watched. He noticed how shadows shifted along walls, how water cooled faster in certain jars, how travellers entered a town not just with their feet, but with their eyes. Across from his home lived Haliman, an old woman known simply as the Keeper of Evening. She carried herself with a calm authority. It was as if she had spent her life arranging small things in their proper places. Lamps, people, silence. She understood all 3. One evening, as the sky turned the colour of steeped tea, Halima opened an old chest and revealed a glass chimney the colour of warm amber. It caught the light in a way that felt deliberate, almost alive. "This," she said, "belonged to the 7th lantern." Raffi leaned closer. "Where is it now?" Halima looked toward the northern road, waiting. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, they set out together. The journey was quiet. The road stretched pale beneath their feet, and the air held the last cool breath of night. As they walked, Halima spoke of the House of 7 Lanterns, a resting place once known across the desert, where travellers could find water, shade, and something rarer, ease. When they finally saw it, the house stood as if paused in time. Dust covered its walls and silence filled its yard, but it had not collapsed. It had simply waited. They entered through a stubborn gate. Inside, the space revealed itself. Stone ledges, a deep well, and 7 niches carved into the wall. 5 lanterns still hung there, dulled but intact. Raffi moved slowly, taking everything in. "Can it be restored?" he asked. Halima smiled faintly. It never forgot how. They began with the simplest task, sweeping. Dust lifted into the air and settled again, as if reluctant to leave. Then they turned to the well. Raffi held his breath as the bucket descended. When it returned, the water shimmered. "It's alive," he said. Halima nodded. "So is the house." As evening approached, they prepared one lantern. Raffi lit it carefully. The flame steadied, and something changed. The walls softened. The silence shifted. The house was no longer empty. They returned to Safra with news, and as news does in quiet places, it spread not with noise, but with certainty. People began to help. A rope here, a cushion there, tools, oil, food, each offering small but together enough. Days later, they returned with everything needed. Work unfolded naturally, repairs, cleaning, arranging. No one rushed. The house guided them. At dusk they lit 3 lanterns, and that night travellers came. A shepherd family entered first, hesitant at the gate. Then others followed. Word had already begun to move. Raffi watched as Halima welcomed them, not with grand gestures but with quiet precision. Water first, then rest. That night, Raffi stayed, under the lantern light. Halima showed him the sequence, how each lamp was meant to serve a moment. Arrival, settling, rest, sleep. "This is not lighting," she said softly. "This is care." Weeks passed. The house found its rhythm again. Travellers came and went. The well remained generous. The lanterns were lit each evening in order, and Raffi changed. He learned how to read flame, how to listen to silence, how to notice what others needed before they spoke. One evening, the final lantern, the amber one, was placed above the gate. Raffi lit it. The glow spread like warmth through the stone. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. The house was complete. Later that night, Raffi stood by the well and looked up. The lanterns reflected the stars. Each one held a piece of the sky. He turned to Halima. "How does it do that?" She answered simply. "It remembers." Seasons passed. The house endured. It did not become crowded. It became trusted. And Raffi, standing beneath the amber light, understood something he had not known before. The journey across the desert was not made easier by distance. It was made gentler by what waited at the end of the day. The desert did not announce itself with grandeur. It revealed itself slowly, through heat that lingered in stone, through wind that whispered instead of roared, through roads that seemed to remember every traveller who had passed before. Along one such road stood a quiet town named Safra, where evenings softened into amber light and mornings began with the scent of bread and dust. Raffi had grown up in this quiet rhythm. He was 12, observant and patient in a way that made older people trust him without knowing why. While others spoke quickly, Raffi watched. He noticed how shadows shifted along walls, how water cooled faster in certain jars, how travellers entered a town not just with their feet, but with their eyes. Across from his home lived Halima, an old woman known simply as the Keeper of Evening. She carried herself with a calm authority, as if she had spent her life arranging small things in their proper places. Lamps, people, silence. She understood all 3. One evening, as the sky turned the colour of steeped tea, Halima opened an old chest and revealed a glass chimney the colour of warm amber. It caught the light in a way that felt deliberate, almost alive. "This," she said, "belonged to the 7th lantern." Raffi leaned closer. "Where is it now?" Halima looked toward the northern road. "Waiting." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, they set out together. The journey was quiet. The road stretched pale beneath their feet, and the air held the last cool breath of night. As they walked, Halima spoke of the House of 7 Lanterns, a resting place once known across the desert, where travellers could find water, shade, and something rarer, ease. When they finally saw it, the house stood as if paused in time. Dust covered its walls and silence filled its yard, but it had not collapsed. It had simply waited. They entered through a stubborn gate. Inside, the space revealed itself, stone ledges, a deep well, and 7 niches carved into the wall. 5 lanterns still hung there, dulled, but intact. Raffi moved slowly, taking everything in. "Can it be restored?" he asked. Halima smiled faintly. It never forgot how. They began with the simplest task, sweeping. Dust lifted into the air and settled again, as if reluctant to leave. Then they turned to the well. Raffi held his breath as the bucket descended. When it returned, the water shimmered. "It's alive," he said. Halima nodded. "So is the house." As evening approached, they prepared one lantern. Raffi lit it carefully. The flame steadied, and something changed. The walls softened. The silence shifted. The house was no longer empty. They returned to Safra with news, and as news does in quiet places, it spread not with noise but with certainty. People began to help. A rope here, a cushion there, tools, oil, food, each offering small but together enough. Days later, they returned with everything needed. Work unfolded naturally. Repairs, cleaning, arranging. No one rushed. The house guided them. At dusk, they lit 3 lanterns, and that night travellers came. A shepherd family entered first, hesitant at the gate, then others followed. Word had already begun to move. Raffi watched as Halima welcomed them, not with grand gestures, but with quiet precision. Water first, then rest. That night, Raffi stayed. Under the lantern light, Halima showed him the sequence, how each lamp was meant to serve a moment. Arrival, settling, rest, sleep. "This is not lighting," she said softly. "This is care." Weeks passed. The house found its rhythm again. Travellers came and went. The well remained generous. The lanterns were lit each evening in order, and Raffi changed. He learned how to read flame, how to listen to silence, how to notice what others needed before they spoke. One evening, the final lantern, the amber one, was placed above the gate. Raffi lit it. The glow spread like warmth through the stone. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. The house was complete. Later that night, Raffi stood by the well and looked up. The lanterns reflected the stars. Each one held a piece of the sky. He turned to Halima. "How does it do that?" she answered simply. "It remembers." Seasons passed. The house endured. It did not become crowded. It became trusted. And Raffi, standing beneath the amber light, understood something he had not known before. The journey across the desert was not made easier by distance. It was made gentler by what waited at the end of the day. The desert did not announce itself with grandeur. It revealed itself slowly, through heat that lingered in stone, through wind that whispered instead of roared, through roads that seemed to remember every traveller who had passed before. Along one such road stood a quiet town named Safra, where evenings softened into amber light, and mornings began with the scent of bread and dust. Raffi had grown up in this quiet rhythm. He was 12, observant, and patient in a way that made older people trust him without knowing why. While others spoke quickly, Raffi watched. He noticed how shadows shifted along walls, how water cooled faster in certain jars, how travellers entered a town not just with their feet, but with their eyes. Across from his home lived Halima, an old woman known simply as the Keeper of Evening. She carried herself with a calm authority, as if she had spent her life arranging small things in their proper places. Lamps, people, silence. She understood all 3. One evening, as the sky turned the colour of steeped tea, Halima opened an old chest and revealed a glass chimney the colour of warm amber. It caught the light in a way that felt deliberate, almost alive. "This," she said, "belonged to the 7th lantern." Raffi leaned closer. "Where is it now?" Halima looked toward the northern road, waiting. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, they set out together. The journey was quiet. The road stretched pale beneath their feet, and the air held the last cool breath of night. As they walked, Halima spoke of the House of 7 Lanterns, a resting place once known across the desert, where travellers could find water, shade, and something rarer, ease. When they finally saw it, the house stood as if paused in time. Dust covered its walls and silence filled its yard, but it had not collapsed. It had simply waited. They entered through a stubborn gate. Inside, the space revealed itself. Stone ledges, a deep well, and 7 niches carved into the wall. 5 lanterns still hung there, dulled but intact. Raffi moved slowly, taking everything in. "Can it be restored?" he asked. Halima smiled faintly. It never forgot how. They began with the simplest task, sweeping. Dust lifted into the air and settled again, as if reluctant to leave. Then they turned to the well. Raffi held his breath as the bucket descended. When it returned, the water shimmered. "It's alive," he said. Halima nodded. "So is the house." As evening approached, they prepared one lantern. Raffi lit it carefully. The flame steadied, and something changed. The walls softened. The silence shifted. The house was no longer empty. They returned to Safra with news, and as news does in quiet places, it spread not with noise but with certainty. People began to help. A rope here, a cushion there. Tools, oil, food, each offering small but together enough. Days later, they returned with everything needed. Work unfolded naturally. Repairs, cleaning, arranging. No one rushed. The house guided them. At dusk, they lit 3 lanterns, and that night travellers came. A shepherd family entered first, hesitant at the gate. Then others followed. Word had already begun to move. Raffi watched as Halima welcomed them, not with grand gestures but with quiet precision. Water first, then rest. That night, Raffi stayed. Under the lantern light, Halima showed him the sequence, how each lamp was meant to serve a moment. Arrival, settling, rest, sleep. "This is not lighting," she said softly. "This is care." Weeks passed. The house found its rhythm again. Travellers came and went. The well remained generous. The lanterns were lit each evening in order. And Raffi changed. He learned how to read flame, how to listen to silence, how to notice what others needed before they spoke. One evening, the final lantern, the amber one, was placed above the gate. Raffi lit it. The glow spread like warmth through the stone. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. The house was complete. Later that night, Raffi stood by the well and looked up. The lanterns reflected the stars. Each one held a piece of the sky. He turned to Halima. "How does it do that?" she answered simply. "It remembers." Seasons passed. The house endured. It did not become crowded. It became trusted. And Raffi, standing beneath the amber light, understood something he had not known before. The journey across the desert was not made easier by distance. It was made gentler by what waited at the end of the day. The desert did not announce itself with grandeur. It revealed itself slowly, through heat that lingered in stone, through wind that whispered instead of roared, through roads that seemed to remember every traveller who had passed before. Along one such road stood a quiet town named Safra, where evenings softened into amber light, and mornings began with the scent of bread and dust. Raffi had grown up in this quiet rhythm. He was 12, observant, and patient in a way that made older people trust him without knowing why. While others spoke quickly, Raffi watched. He noticed how shadows shifted along walls, how water cooled faster in certain jars, how travellers entered a town not just with their feet, but with their eyes. Across from his home lived Halima, an old woman known simply as the Keeper of Evening. She carried herself with a calm authority, as if she had spent her life arranging small things in their proper places. Lamps, people, silence. She understood all 3. One evening, as the sky turned the colour of steeped tea, Halima opened an old chest and revealed a glass chimney the colour of warm amber. It caught the light in a way that felt deliberate, almost alive. "This," she said, "belonged to the 7th lantern." Raffi leaned closer. "Where is it now?" Halima looked toward the northern road. "Waiting." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, they set out together. The journey was quiet. The road stretched pale beneath their feet, and the air held the last cool breath of night. As they walked, Halima spoke of the House of 7 Lanterns, a resting place once known across the desert, where travellers could find water, shade, and something rarer, ease. When they finally saw it, the house stood as if paused in time. Dust covered its walls and silence filled its yard, but it had not collapsed. It had simply waited. They entered through a stubborn gate. Inside, the space revealed itself, stone ledges, a deep well, and 7 niches carved into the wall. 5 lanterns still hung there, dulled but intact. Rafi moved slowly, taking everything in. "Can it be restored?" he asked. Halima smiled faintly. "It never forgot how." They began with the simplest task, sweeping. Dust lifted into the air and settled again, as if reluctant to leave. Then they turned to the well. Rafi held his breath as the bucket descended. When it returned, the water shimmered. "It's alive," he said. Halima nodded. "So is the house." As evening approached, they prepared one lantern. Rafi lit it carefully. The flame steadied, and something changed. The walls softened. The silence shifted. The house was no longer empty. They returned to Safra with news, and as news does in quiet places, it spread not with noise but with certainty. People began to help. A rope here, a cushion there. Tools, oil, food, each offering small but together enough. Days later they returned with everything needed. Work unfolded naturally. Repairs, cleaning, arranging. No one rushed. The house guided them. At dusk they lit 3 lanterns, and that night travellers came. A shepherd family entered first, hesitant at the gate. Then others followed. Word had already begun to move. Rafi watched as Halima welcomed them, not with grand gestures but with quiet precision. Water first, then rest. That night, Rafi stayed. Under the lantern light, Halima showed him the sequence, how each lamp was meant to serve a moment. Arrival, settling, rest, sleep. "This is not lighting," she said softly. "This is care." Weeks passed. The house found its rhythm again. Travellers came and went. The well remained generous. The lanterns were lit each evening in order, and Rafi changed. He learned how to read flame, how to listen to silence, how to notice what others needed before they spoke. One evening, the final lantern, the amber one, was placed above the gate. Rafi lit it. The glow spread like warmth through the stone. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. The house was complete. Later that night, Rafi stood by the well and looked up. The lanterns reflected the stars. Each one held a piece of the sky. He turned to Halima. "How does it do that?" She answered simply. "It remembers." Seasons passed. The house endured. It did not become crowded. It became trusted. And Rafi, standing beneath the amber light, understood something he had not known before.